It was just like everything started going down. But I really wish that she could see her kids grow up.
Vanessa laid on the ground with a bullet hole in her chest and blood everywhere. It's a scary scene.
Often when we think about love, there's a happy ever after. But the whole sad situation about this, you have two people who are falling for the exact same person.
There's a lot of contention, just jealousy, anger, a lot of fights. It's an environment where there can be a lot of conflict and chaos.
I think she had been embarrassed. I think she was angry. And she did a terrible, terrible thing.
June 26th, 2011. It's around 5:20 p.m. when police in Pine Bluff, Arkansas, receive multiple reports of shots fired at the Sunset Village Apartments.
911. Somebody just got shot at Sunset Village, ma'am. Somebody just got shot at Sunset. 911, may I help you?
Back over there. 911, I need you out here. Somebody just got shot.
911. But y'all please come to his apartment in Sunset. Please, this girl got shot at her chest.
I was an on-call detective. I received a call about a possible shooting victim that was laying at our apartment complex on the ground. Upon my arrival, there was a lot of people out. It was kind of chaotic. And a lot of people were screaming. A lot of people was hollering at the police. I saw a man with the victim had rode on her back and was attempting to give her CPR. She had a single gunshot wound to the back.
Officers check her ID. They find out that she is a 21-year-old named Vanessa Bearden and a mom of two.
Paramedics arrive on the scene moments later.
Vanessa's unresponsive, but they do find a pulse, so they're hopeful, and first responders are working really hard to save her life and rush her to the hospital.
Vanessa Bearden was born on May 15, 1990. She grew up just outside Pine Bluff on her family's farm.
My grandfather he was a farmer. He made sure that my grandma had all of this property for us. We have horses, geese, chickens. We used to get the chicken eggs.
By all accounts, they were a very loving, tight-knit family. Vanessa and her siblings were raised in the church, and she sang in the choir. In fact, she was the first Black altar girl of that church.
Vanessa, my auntie, she liked to ride horses, go to church. She was really family-oriented. She was respected a lot. Everybody knew that she was a good person.
One of her closest friends growing up was a girl named Kobe. Their families actually knew each other. They went to the same school, and in fact, they had a lot in common.
But Vanessa's idyllic childhood also came with some unique challenges.
She struggled with mental health issues like OCD and ADHD. The family didn't know what to do with that, unfortunately. So Vanessa started doing a lot of research on her own. Even as a kid, she would write reports about it for school. Growing up on a farm, though, may have helped with that a little bit. Being around animals and nature, it can be very grounding. And her father seemed to be especially understanding as well. You know, Vanessa's dad was a down-to-earth country type guy. So, his way of helping was to give her a pocket knife. It was a reminder not to let her OCD get her tied up into knots. If she ever felt it was closing in, he wanted her to cut right through it.
In 2008, when Vanessa was 17 years old, she suffered a series of emotional blows. First, her father died of cancer. Then, her mother was diagnosed with the disease as well.
When Vanessa's father passed away and her mom got diagnosed with cancer, she really stepped up in the family. She helped with her brother and sister, she helped them do homework, as well as her niece, and really tried to keep the family together.
She did everything for us when my mama wasn't there. She basically taught us what we needed to know for school-wise. She was real smart.
Then, Vanessa discovered she was going to have a child of her own.
Now, Vanessa was a teenager when she found out she was pregnant. And it seemed that that boyfriend was not that great of a guy. But you know, Vanessa, she tried to make the relationship work anyway. She dropped out to have the baby, and she got her GED instead. Vanessa moves in with this guy, and after another year, she's pregnant with their second child. But it's very clear he's not cut out to be a husband or a father, so she finally leaves him.
To support her children as a single mother, Vanessa took classes to become a certified nursing assistant. She was inspired by her struggles with mental health to help others with similar issues.
After she got her certificate, Vanessa got a job at a daycare center. So she wanted to pursue a career in child psychology and counsel kids with mental illness so they wouldn't, have to go through what she did. And she kept taking courses at Southeastern Arkansas College.
She was in a helping field where, she was a CNA. She's working towards becoming an RN. So that's part of that field is making sure that people are being safe and being taken care of when they have needs they can't take care of themselves.
By the time she was 21, Vanessa had her hands full, juggling single motherhood, work, and school, as well as a new relationship.
He was really good to her, and that relationship became serious real quick. He even popped a question while they were looking for an apartment in Little Rock. And she was looking for nursing jobs in the new city to start her new life.
By summer 2011, Vanessa seemed to have a promising future ahead of her. But now, she's been shot outside an apartment building, and police want to know why.
She was 21, she had 2 kids. So this was shocking to a lot of people. Being shot in broad daylight, it's a scary scene. Whoever shot Vanessa definitely had a reason behind it, had a motive. It was intentional.
While on the scene, it was very chaotic. There was a lot of witnesses there from the different apartment complexes that was around in the area. So we had to secure the area and calm the scene down so we could figure out what was going on. Miss Vanessa Bearden, she did not live at the complex where she was found. So the question that needed to be answered was, why was she in that area? Was it a boyfriend, ex-boyfriend, a significant other, attempted robbery? Why was she shot?
As doctors struggle to save the life of gunshot victim Vanessa Bearden, detectives with the Pine Bluff Police Department try to figure out exactly what happened.
There were multiple 911 calls coming into dispatch that day. There are reports of a woman being shot.
There are several apartment buildings all nearby, and many of the witnesses are residents who heard the commotion and also the gunshot. But what led up to this moment? They know from experience that time is not on their side. So police need to move quickly before witnesses scatter or decide to stay silent.
I believe in a lot of small communities, especially African American communities, there's not always a connection between the police and the community. In those communities, most individuals will take care of their own things, so if a problem is occurring, the authorities aren't always called in to settle disputes or things of that nature because there may be a lack of trust that is there.
Investigators start with the man who was giving Vanessa CPR when first responders arrived.
The Good Samaritan, who still has blood on his clothes, actually is the reverend of the church across the street where Vanessa got shot.
He heard some gunshots and then almost immediately heard some females screaming for some help. And he went to the area where they were, and he discovered Vanessa Beard and discovered that she had been shot. He began to give her first aid.
He says he saw a few girls running from the scene when he got there. He said he also saw a young lady in the breezeway with a gun. He said he didn't recognize her, but he feels confident that he could pick her out of a lineup.
The Reverend also gives police a pocket knife he found in Vanessa's waistband. He has no idea whether she used it during the fight.
Now, it's not uncommon that women carry knives. Sometimes it's for protection, when they're walking by themselves. Maybe some women who aren't comfortable carrying guns have been known to carry knives on them.
Pine Bluff is a bit on the rough areas, I won't lie. It has its nickname coined as Crime Bluff. Yeah. I carry a pocket knife for my protection. I have one in the car. I have one in my purse. It's just because as a female in Pine Bluff, or as a black female in general, I feel like it's important to just have some type of protection.
So investigators don't find any blood on the knife, so it definitely doesn't look like it's a stabbing. But there is a 9mm shell casing on the ground.
Police take the bullet casing into evidence, but there's little else to go on. They're hoping someone will be able to identify the suspected shooter, whom witnesses describe as a young African-American woman.
The apartments in this complex are really close together, and they're all connected by this breezeway. So when something happens, someone will either hear it or see it. Police are interviewing everyone, and everyone pretty much had the same story.
It all began in the apartment parking lot earlier that day.
They said that the suspect was involved in an argument that escalated into an altercation with 8 females. They said also that they saw someone recording this fight on their phone.
There were people from all over those apartment complexes. There's 4 or 5 apartment complexes that sit right there in that 2 or 3 block area. There were 20, 30, maybe even 40 people there, all of them with cell phones.
The witnesses, however, were not sure what that initial fight was about, but a man broke it up and put the suspect in a car. They drove away, and the crowd dispersed. Now, a few of the other women involved in the fight stayed there, though.
A short while later, the suspect returns and approaches Vanessa and her friend through the apartment breezeway.
And the guy who broke up the fight is no longer with her, and now she's got a gun. She exchanges words with these other women, and it gets very heated. That's when she opens fire.
They hear a gunshot, and they see Vanessa collapse. They then see the shooter go over to Vanessa stand over her, and then walk away.
Witnesses believe the shooter lives in the apartment complex. Luckily, someone comes forward who can identify her.
While police are still on the scene, a young lady comes up to one of the officers and introduces herself as Colby. She's Vanessa's friend and was also there when everything happened.
She says she knows exactly who the shooter is and why she did it. This was all about revenge.
Police in Pine Bluff, Arkansas are talking to Colby, who says she was with 21-year-old Vanessa Bearden when she was shot. According to Colby, the fight that led to the shooting started before they even got there.
Colby told the officers that she and her friends were there visiting another one of their friends by the name of Alicia.
A while later, Vanessa stopped by the apartment complex and was hanging out with Colby while waiting for her ride home.
Colby tells police that when she and Vanessa arrived, they started watching an argument that had started in the parking lot, which was between Alicia and another woman, Olivia Moody.
Colby tells the officers that Alicia and Olivia are arguing over a man.
She described how Alicia was now dating a young man that Olivia Moody used to be involved with, and how that caused some friction. And it ended up with Alicia and Olivia Moody getting into a fight.
And instead of being adult about it, they both was out there fighting.
Colby says the fight quickly drew a crowd of people. Some of them even joined in.
It's almost like being on a schoolyard, a playground. When the fight broke out, everybody that was around those apartment complexes came to watch and unfortunately egg it on. Mrs. Moody was just as involved in that provocation and those actions as Alicia was. She was not trying to escape them. She was not trying to get away from them. She was giving as good as she got.
Colby says Vanessa Bearden wasn't involved at first because she was recording the fight on her cell phone. After several minutes, someone finally intervened.
During the fight with Miss Moody, a friend of hers was able to pull her from the fight. Miss Moody, she noticed Miss Bearden recording the fight and proceeded towards her direction.
According to witness accounts, at that point, Olivia broke away from her friend and lunged towards Vanessa until the friend stopped her again.
He finally manages to break up the fight and gets Olivia to leave with him.
Alicia went back to her apartment, but Colby and Vanessa stayed outside a while longer. Colby now wishes they hadn't.
Colby and Vanessa decide to just take a breather, relax, cool off a bit. So they found an area in the complex to just kind of sit and talk.
The suspect drives by as a passenger in a vehicle and rolls down the window and hollers out the window something to the effect of, "I'll see you females later," except she didn't say female.
Colby says Vanessa showed her the knife that her dad gave her. Like she was ready if anything happens. But unfortunately, the knife was more of a security blanket than a weapon. Colby says she felt like Olivia was setting them up, and it turns out she was right.
Apparently, in that time, she went and got a gun and was trying to bait them back to fight.
Colby says she and Vanessa eventually decided to head back through the breezeway. That's when Olivia stepped around the corner.
She is walking towards them. Then she brandishes that firearm at them.
Kobe immediately takes off running and hears the gunshots. She thinks Vanessa's right behind her, but she's not.
The bullet hit Vanessa in her back as she was running away, and it came out through her chest, and she just collapsed to the ground.
But if Olivia's disagreement was with Alicia, why did she go after Vanessa?
I remember kind of being shocked that Alicia, the main person that Olivia Moody had the complaint with, was not even there.
Miss Bearden just got drawn into this situation by being a friend.
It could be that Olivia was upset with Vanessa because she was recording the fight. Or maybe she was angry because they were all ganging up on her, and she didn't care who she shot.
When investigators talk to Alicia at her apartment, she verifies Colby's story, but she wasn't there to witness the shooting itself. The other man Colby mentioned is nowhere to be found.
Nobody knew who he really was. Wasn't as if we had a name associated with a person that could go be interviewed immediately after the incident.
The only person detectives haven't spoken to yet is Olivia Moody herself. But before they can do that, they get some terrible news.
Vanessa was rushed to Jefferson Regional Medical Center. And despite the doctor's best efforts, she succumbed to her injuries, and she was pronounced dead at the hospital.
With her being gone, it took from us too. She the heart of the family. Her and Vanessa and my mom, like, we lose them, we ain't got no family.
Vanessa's death also means the case has officially become a homicide.
Investigators don't know yet if this woman intended to kill Vanessa, but either way, she's looking at a murder charge.
Arkansas police now have a suspect for the shooting that claimed the life of Vanessa Bearden. 20-year-old Olivia Moody. But a background check suggests Olivia is the opposite of a cold-blooded killer.
Olivia's life was kind of like an inspirational story.
Our mother was a drug addict, and she was actually raised by her grandmother. It was in a not-so-great neighborhood in Chicago, Illinois.
Everybody in the community knew Olivia to be such a kind-hearted person. She always had a smile. She always had a hug. When Olivia was just 8 years old, she got featured in Time magazine seeking out for help for her mother and her addiction. It showed her character even just as a young child. Some of her siblings followed under her mother's footsteps, and Olivia was determined not to follow down that same path. She wanted to succeed in life.
Olivia worked hard in school, believing that education was the best way out of her situation.
Olivia was academically gifted. She was a straight-A student all throughout high school, and even with growing up in a rough high school, she still managed to be excelling.
She got teased for it a lot, but it eventually paid off.
She earns a scholarship to come down to the University of Arkansas at Pine Bluff to be able to get into a new environment, to also find a place to basically reset her life and start life over again so she can get away from the upbringing that she came up with.
Olivia decided to major in criminal justice with plans to eventually get her law degree.
Olivia spent her whole life seeing tragedies, seeing trauma just in her own city. She watched her mom go through addiction, watching close family members fall into street violence. These are just some of the things that led her to wanting to become an attorney.
She also was doing intern work with one of the circuit courts here in town. And so people thought a lot of Olivia.
She was on the dean's list. She was very intelligent. Had a bright future ahead of her.
While in college, she also started her first serious relationship.
Olivia was somewhat of an oddball in Pine Bluff. She was able to find a boyfriend and find love. She was finally happy. She was really finding her way.
Growing up and maybe not having secure relationships with her parents and finding, someone that she could be in love with and she started to feel safe with and started to maybe establish a family of her own.
Olivia was heartbroken when her boyfriend suddenly broke up with her and started dating Alicia, the young woman from the recent fight.
Olivia was in love with her boyfriend, and when Alicia came and basically stole him, that was very devastating for her and upsetting. Love triangles can be really tricky. It often leads to a lot of drama. There's a lot of contention, just jealousy, anger, a lot of fights. It's an environment where there can be a lot of conflict and chaos.
But was it enough to drive an aspiring lawyer to kill someone?
We went to the apartment where the witnesses told us that she lived, knocked on the door. She opened the door, asked her if she was Olivia Moody. She stated that was her. When we told her we was going to place her on arrest and take her for questioning, she didn't seem like she was upset at that time. She seemed more like she was relieved. I told her I was going to read her rights before I asked any questions. She said she understood that because she was a student at UAPB and she was a criminal justice major. So I read her rights, and what I found interesting was she told me that the correct charge that you would have for me would be second-degree murder.
Just hours after Vanessa Bearden was killed, the primary suspect, Olivia Moody, sits down with investigators to give her side of the story. Olivia insists she didn't mean to kill anyone. She was defending herself against a group of bullies.
Olivia admits that she was upset about her boyfriend and his relationship with Alicia. But according to her, Alicia was the one that wouldn't let it go.
Alicia definitely was cocky about it. She was excited. She wanted to brag. She definitely wanted to rub it in Olivia's face. Constant picking, nagging, to the point where Olivia just had to block her.
To make matters worse, Alicia's apartment was just across the street from Olivia's.
But it was crystal clear that they did not like each other. And a fight was bound to happen when they all live in that small area with all those different complexes.
And on June 26th, the two finally collided.
Olivia decided to go to the corner store down from her apartment complex. There, she was met by Alicia and a group of her friends, and that's when everything started.
The way Olivia tells it, Alicia was the one that jumped her first. Now they get into it, but guess what? Olivia is tougher than anyone gave her credit for.
Once Olivia seemed to be getting the better of Alicia, her friends jumped in the fight. And basically, well, when it's many on one, the many usually win.
The video taken of the fight shows clearly Olivia was outnumbered. There's hair pulling and arms flying, and it was a chaotic scene for sure.
Olivia was actually knocked over into a ditch, and she assumed the fetal position.
Olivia says she was afraid the group of women was going to kill her until her friend arrived to break up the fight. As he pulls her away, Olivia notices Vanessa recording.
She's already upset that all these women are gaining up on her, but then when she saw someone recording it, that took her to a whole nother level.
But her friend stopped her before the fight could escalate any further.
Put Olivia in his car and took her to one of Olivia's friends' house so that she could feel safe somewhere, because these same girls were already harassing her at her place.
He also gave her the gun to protect herself. Olivia claims that at the time, neither of them expected she would have to use it.
Sometime later, Olivia returns back to the apartment, and the girls who had fought her where Olivia lived were gathered not too far from her apartment.
Olivia says she had her friend drop her off at the back entrance so that she could avoid all of them. But as she walked past the breezeway, she heard one of them shout, "Get her!"
Olivia says that's when she saw Vanessa coming towards her and pulled out the gun.
Olivia closed her eyes and shot the gun. And that's when Vanessa was hit.
Miss Moody, in her testimony that she gave, she admitted firing the gun, but she also said that she was really just trying to scare them away.
To detectives, it seems more likely that Olivia shot Vanessa because she was still angry at her for recording the fight.
In the digital age, when something happens and it's recorded, it's there and it never goes away. And anybody can have that, can get a copy of that. You never can take that back. So I can imagine Olivia was feeling helpless at that time period, some embarrassment.
She had gone after Vanessa earlier, so it kind of made sense that she would go after her again when Vanessa got back.
Based on the statements gathered so far, police arrest Olivia Moody and take her into custody.
She was charged with murder in the first degree, which is a Class Y felony in the state of Arkansas. Carries with it a mandatory minimum sentence of 10 years up to life imprisonment.
Not everyone believes she's guilty, however. As word of Olivia's arrest begins to spread, many residents rush to support her.
She's a bright, young legal student that's given a lot to the community. A lot of people believed her. And in fact, they saw her as the victim.
Olivia impacted so many people in the community, so much so to when she was arrested, the community got together to raise some money for her to be bonded out. There were fundraisers and fish fries and raffles, all to make sure that she had a good legal team on her side.
But there are just as many supporters for Vanessa Bearden.
They remember Mrs. Bearden's accomplishments in becoming a nurse and the love that everyone said that Mrs. Bearden had for her children.
People in the community also helped raise money for Vanessa's mother because she was left to raise 2 children on her own, all while having terminal cancer.
The town is deeply divided over the case, and prosecutors fear a jury might be as well.
Some felt like it was self-defense. Some felt like it was murder.
On May 12, 2012, Olivia Moody graduates college with a criminal justice degree and a 3.6 GPA. 4 days later, she stands trial for the killing of Vanessa Bearden. The prosecution's case centers around disproving Olivia's claim of self-defense.
Mrs. Moody was just as involved in that provocation and those actions as Alicia was.
The fight has been over for a while before Olivia shoots Vanessa. Her life is not in danger when she comes back with that gun.
We're not talking about a 5-minute reactionary thing that happens here. We're looking at Olivia getting away from the situation, leaving and going away for an hour, and now coming back. Now it's time for, retribution from Olivia's perspective.
Olivia Moody. She was trying very clearly to bait those young ladies to come to her on her terms.
Prosecutors argue Olivia used her knowledge of the criminal justice system to lure Vanessa into a situation where she could argue self-defense, ironically helping prove it was a premeditated act. Although Vanessa had a knife on her at the time, her friend Colby testifies that she never used it or threatened Olivia with it.
If the knife had in fact been in her hand, certainly that would be part of the overall circumstances that could have been argued to a jury to produce fear. But in Arkansas, you have to prove that there was no opportunity for Olivia Moody to have avoided the situation or to have retreated from the situation.
Vanessa's injuries also prove that she couldn't have been moving towards Olivia.
She had a single gunshot wound to the back, a back shoulder. She was fleeing from the suspect, and at that point, she was no longer a threat.
Still, with public opinion about Olivia's guilt so evenly divided in the town, prosecutors decide to play it safe.
The prosecution offered to give her a plea bargain. The prosecution offered to reduce the charge against Olivia Moody from first-degree murder to manslaughter, which is a Class D felony, carrying with it a maximum prison sentence of 6 years and or a fine of $10,000. And she declined.
Olivia seems certain that once the jury hears her side of the story, she'll be acquitted.
In the state of Arkansas, when you plead self-defense, we were going to have her testify as to her state of mind.
The jury hears all about Olivia's background, how she's been bullied on social media, and how these women have ganged up on her. They're arguing when she sees Vanessa waiting for her, she thinks it's going to happen again.
And we're trying to prove that the circumstances were such that a reasonable person in Olivia's position would have been in fear of serious bodily harm or death had the young ladies who were approaching her engaged her in another assault.
But the jury doesn't seem to be convinced.
Olivia came across to jurors as not being remorseful, especially given her obvious intelligence and education. And I don't think it was helped by her performance on the stand.
She was very matter of fact. She was not upset at all. She did not appear to have any remorse or concern for Vanessa Bearden. She was very snobbish, if not arrogant, almost of the attitude of, I've told you it was self-defense, how dare you question me?
It really came down to, does the jury believe that it was reasonable and the only option Mrs. Moody had was to defend herself with deadly force?
On May 18th, 2012, the jury returns a verdict. While they don't think the killing was premeditated, they also don't believe it was self-defense. Instead, they find Olivia Moody guilty of second-degree murder. She receives the maximum sentence.
On May 12th, Olivia received her bachelor's degree in honors. And on May 19th, she received 30 years in prison.
The two women involved are fighting over the same man. And that's not a good reason in Pine Bluff, Arkansas, for somebody to die. And I think that also had something to do with the length of the sentence. In the minds of some jurors, when you talk to them, they had an expectation that of someone with Olivia's education, training, and intelligence, that she would make different choices, rightly or wrongly.
Olivia Moody has no one to blame for this but herself. She walked through that breezeway with that gun in her hand. She shot Vanessa Bearden as Vanessa Bearden was unarmed and ran away from her. That is no one's fault but Olivia Moody's.
In 2019, Olivia gets some surprising news.
After serving just 7 years of her sentence, Olivia went in front of the parole board, and she was released on September 27th, 2019, which actually was her 29th birthday.
Shootings and homicides, we deal with them quite frequently. This one was a little different because it wasn't drug-related and it wasn't gang-related. It was just a tragedy. 2 young ladies' lives, one lost, families torn apart. It was a situation I feel like that probably could have been avoided.
Even if Olivia claimed that she was being bullied, Vanessa had actually never met her before that day. Hearing Olivia paint herself as the victim was painful for her family, because Vanessa is the one that's not gonna see her kids grow up.
Revenge. That's all it was. She wanted revenge. She came back to a situation that had already de-escalated, and she killed her cold blood. They didn't know each other. Vanessa, my auntie, she was just there at the wrong time.
I believe that Olivia Moody had been embarrassed earlier that day. I believe that she thought she had set up a scenario where she could get payback or get revenge and get away with it. And she was wrong. She did a very terrible, terrible thing and cost, by all accounts, a wonderful young lady and mother, Vanessa Bearden, her life.
I really wish that she could see her kids grow up. Because they smart. They real smart. Well, her daughter, she looked just like Vanessa. So it's just like she never really even loved. But she, we know she's gone. It's sad.
The road begins like any other road. It cuts through mountains, curves around rivers, and disappears into forests so vast that they seem to swallow the horizon itself. During the day, Highway 16 in northern British Columbia can look breathtaking. Snow-capped peaks stand in the distance like silent guardians. Endless pine trees stretch toward the sky. Small towns emerge briefly from the wilderness before vanishing again behind walls of green. To a traveler passing through, it might feel peaceful. But when darkness falls, the highway becomes something else. The headlights of a lone vehicle illuminate only a narrow tunnel through the blackness. Beyond that beam of light lies an ocean of forest. There are stretches where a driver can travel for miles without seeing another car. No houses, no businesses, no signs of life. Only the sound of tires rolling across asphalt and the unsettling feeling that the wilderness is watching. For decades, people living in northern British Columbia have carried stories about this road. Stories whispered around kitchen tables. Stories repeated at community gatherings. Stories passed from parents to daughters. Don't hitchhike after dark. Don't accept rides from strangers. Don't walk alone on Highway 16. And above all, if someone disappears, pray they come home before the forest claims them. Because too many never did. Over the years, dozens of women and girls vanished along this lonely stretch of highway. Some were Indigenous teenagers, trying to reach a nearby town. Some were young mothers. Some were students. Some were simply trying to get home. A few were found. Many were not. The disappearances seemed scattered at first, separated by years, by distance, by circumstance. One girl vanished in the late 1960s. Another disappeared decades later. Then another. And another. Different faces. Different families. Different dreams. Yet somehow the same road. The same silence. The same ending. No one knew exactly when people began calling it the Highway of Tears. Perhaps the name emerged slowly, born from grief accumulated over generations. Perhaps it came from the tears shed by mothers standing beside missing person posters that faded under rain and snow. Perhaps it came from fathers who drove the highway night after night searching ditches, forests, and abandoned roads for daughters who never returned. Or perhaps the highway earned its name because every kilometer seemed to carry a story of loss. A story that nobody wanted to hear. A story that nobody could forget. What makes the Highway of Tears different from most true crime cases is that there is no single crime scene. There is no single body. There is no single victim. And there is no single killer. Instead, there is a corridor of mysteries stretching hundreds of kilometers across one of the most isolated regions in Canada. Imagine trying to investigate a disappearance when the potential crime scene is larger than some countries. Imagine searching endless forests where a body could remain hidden for decades. Imagine trying to identify a suspect when years pass between cases and witnesses are scarce. Now imagine being the family waiting for answers. Waiting through birthdays. Waiting through holidays. Waiting through decades. Waiting for a phone call that never comes. For many families, that wait continues to this day. The forests of northern British Columbia are beautiful, but beauty can be deceptive. The trees are dense enough to conceal secrets. The mountains create natural barriers. Rivers carve through the landscape like scars. In winter, snow blankets everything beneath a cold white silence. In summer, the wilderness becomes a maze of vegetation where even experienced searchers can become disoriented. If someone vanished here, the land itself seemed determined to keep the truth hidden. And sometimes it did. There were cases where remains were discovered years after a disappearance. There were cases where only fragments were found. There were cases where nothing was ever recovered at all. Just absence. Just questions. Just a bedroom left untouched. A family photograph frozen in time. A voice remembered but never heard again. For outsiders reading newspaper headlines, these cases often appeared as isolated tragedies. Another missing woman. Another unsolved investigation. Another brief article before public attention moved elsewhere. But for the communities along Highway 16, the disappearances formed a pattern. A terrifying pattern. Every new missing person report reopened old wounds. Every discovery of human remains brought renewed fear. Every passing year, without answers, deepened the suspicion that something far darker was unfolding. Some believed a serial killer was stalking the highway. Others believed multiple predators were exploiting the same vulnerable conditions. Many feared the truth was even more complicated than anyone imagined. Because the road offered opportunities. Long stretches without witnesses. Limited transportation. Remote communities. Young women forced to rely on strangers for rides. A predator looking for victims could find them here. And a predator looking to hide evidence could find endless places to do so. As the years passed, names began accumulating. Each name represented a life. Not a statistic. Not a headline. A person. Someone who laughed. Someone who loved. Someone who had plans for the future. Someone whose absence left a permanent wound behind. Gloria Moody. Alberta Williams. Ramona Wilson. Roxanne Thiara. Nicole Hoare. Ayala Sarik Olga. And many more. Some of their stories would become nationally known. Others would fade from public memory. But for their families, forgetting was never an option. The tragedy of the Highway of Tears is not measured only by the number of missing women. It is measured by the number of people left behind. Mothers waking up every morning wondering what happened. Brothers carrying guilt for not being there. Friends replaying final conversations over and over in their minds. Communities living with fear that the next victim might be someone they know. There is a particular cruelty in an unsolved disappearance. Death, as devastating as it is, eventually provides certainty. A disappearance does not. A disappearance traps families between hope and despair. Maybe she is alive. Maybe she is suffering somewhere. Maybe she is waiting to be rescued. Maybe she is gone. The mind cycles endlessly through possibilities. Years become decades. Questions become permanent companions. And every time the phone rings unexpectedly, a small part of the heart still wonders. Could this be the answer? Most of the time, it isn't. By the early 2000s, public pressure had grown impossible to ignore. The number of disappearances, the similarities between cases, and the frustration of families forced authorities to take a deeper look. But by then, many opportunities had already been lost. Witnesses had forgotten details. Evidence had deteriorated. Memories had faded. Entire lives had passed since some of the earliest disappearances. The road had continued carrying traffic. The forests had continued growing. The years had continued moving forward. Yet the questions remained exactly where they had always been. Waiting. Waiting for someone to connect the dots. Waiting for someone to explain why so many women disappeared along the same highway. Waiting for justice. The deeper investigators looked, the more unsettling the mystery became. Some cases seemed connected. Others did not. Some suspects emerged. Some were ruled out. Some theories collapsed under scrutiny. Others refused to disappear. Instead of one clear answer, investigators found layers of uncertainty. The Highway of Tears was becoming more than a criminal investigation. It was becoming a symbol of fear, a symbol of neglect, a symbol of communities that felt ignored, a symbol of families who believed their loved ones deserved more attention than they had received. And perhaps most haunting of all, it became a symbol of how easily people can vanish. A young woman standing beside a road, a vehicle slowing down, a door opening, a decision taking only seconds. Then nothing. No scream heard. No witness coming forward. No certainty about what happened next. Only the endless highway stretching into darkness. Tonight, we begin a journey into one of Canada's most disturbing and enduring mysteries. This is not the story of a single killer. It is not the story of a single victim. It is the story of a road. A road lined with unanswered questions. A road haunted by memories. A road where families have searched for truth for more than half a century. And before this story is over, we will follow the lives of the women who disappeared, examine the investigations that struggled to find answers, explore the theories that continue to divide experts, and confront a painful question that still echoes across northern British Columbia. How can so many people vanish along the same road, and still leave behind so few answers? This is the Highway of Tears. And the darkness ahead is far deeper than anyone first imagined. If the Highway of Tears has a beginning, it does not start with a crime. It starts with geography. Long before newspaper headlines, police investigations, and missing person posters, there was only land. Vast, untamed, and indifferent land stretching across northern British Columbia. Mountains rose from the earth like ancient stone walls. Rivers carved their way through valleys formed thousands of years earlier. Endless forests spread across the landscape in every direction, creating one of the largest wilderness regions in North America. The people who lived here understood something outsiders often failed to grasp. Nature was beautiful. Nature was also unforgiving. A wrong turn could leave someone lost for days. A sudden snowstorm could erase roads and landmarks within hours. Temperatures could drop dramatically after sunset. Distances that looked manageable on a map could become exhausting realities in the wilderness. This was not a place that tolerated mistakes. And yet thousands of people called it home. Highway 16 cuts through the heart of this region. Known as the Yellowhead Highway, it stretches across western Canada, but the section that would eventually become known as the Highway of Tears runs roughly 720 kilometers between Prince George and Prince Rupert. To understand the mystery, one must first understand this road. Driving Highway 16 is unlike driving through a major urban corridor. The journey passes through isolated communities, separated by vast stretches of wilderness. A traveler might leave one town and not encounter another for dozens of kilometers. Cell phone coverage was unreliable for many years. Public transportation was limited or non-existent in some areas. For locals, these conditions were simply a fact of life. For vulnerable individuals, they could become a matter of survival. Small communities dot the highway like islands in an ocean of forest. Places such as Smithers, Burns Lake, Vanderhoof, Houston, Terrace, and Prince Rupert developed around industries that shaped northern British Columbia for generations. Logging, mining, fishing, railroads. The towns possessed a rugged resilience. People knew their neighbors. Families often remained in the same communities for decades. News traveled quickly. When someone died, everyone attended the funeral. When someone disappeared, everyone felt the loss. Yet these communities also faced challenges rarely understood by people living in major Canadian cities. Economic opportunities were limited. Jobs could disappear when mills closed or resource prices fell. Transportation options were scarce. Many families struggled financially. And for young people, particularly young women, getting from one place to another often meant relying on rides from friends, relatives, or complete strangers. Hitchhiking became common. Not because it was safe, because it was necessary. A teenager needed to reach school. A mother needed to get to work. A young woman wanted to visit family in the next town. Without reliable buses or personal vehicles, standing beside the highway with a thumb extended became part of daily life. People knew the risks, but they also knew they had few alternatives. To understand why so many victims were Indigenous women, one must also understand the history of Indigenous communities in Canada. For generations, Indigenous peoples faced systemic discrimination, forced displacement, residential schools, poverty, and barriers to education and employment. The consequences of these policies echoed through families and communities long after the official programs ended. Many Indigenous communities along Highway 16 experienced higher rates of poverty than surrounding populations. Access to services was limited. Transportation infrastructure was inadequate. Opportunities were often concentrated far from where people lived. Young Indigenous women frequently traveled between communities seeking education, employment, healthcare, or family connections. The road became a bridge connecting lives. It also became a place of danger. As years passed, another reality emerged. When Indigenous women disappeared, the response was often different. Families would later describe reporting loved ones missing only to encounter skepticism. Some were told to wait. Others felt authorities assumed the missing women would eventually return on their own. Whether intentional or systemic, the result was the same. Critical hours sometimes slipped away. And in missing person cases, time is often the most valuable resource investigators possess. Northern British Columbia, in the late 20th century, was a world far removed from modern expectations. There were no smartphones, no GPS tracking, no social media posts revealing a person's location, no digital footprints documenting every movement. A young woman could leave home and effectively disappear from the record within minutes. If witnesses were unavailable and evidence scarce, investigators often had little to work with. The forests surrounding Highway 16 amplified these challenges. Millions of trees stretched across rugged terrain. Abandoned logging roads branched into remote wilderness. Countless lakes, rivers, and ravines created natural hiding places. If a predator wanted privacy, the landscape provided it. If evidence needed to be concealed, the landscape provided that too. And if investigators arrived weeks, months, or years later, nature often erased whatever traces remained. Rain washed away evidence. Animals scattered remains. Vegetation reclaimed disturbed ground. The wilderness became an accomplice to silence. During the winter months, the highway transformed again. Snowstorms could reduce visibility to almost nothing. Roads became slick and dangerous. Vehicles occasionally slid into ditches and vanished beneath deep snowdrifts. Entire regions seemed isolated from the rest of the world. For someone stranded alone, help could be hours away. For someone in danger, there might be nobody to hear a cry for help. Even during summer, the environment carried an eerie sense of isolation. The days were long. The forests appeared endless. Travelers could drive for extended periods without seeing another vehicle. As darkness approached, shadows filled the spaces between trees. The wilderness seemed to close in around the road. Locals learned to respect that feeling. Visitors often underestimated it. The first disappearances did not immediately create a national mystery. Individual cases were treated as individual tragedies. A missing girl here. A murdered woman there. Communities mourned, investigations unfolded, and life continued. At least on the surface. But beneath that surface, concern was growing. Patterns were beginning to emerge. The same road appeared repeatedly in police reports. The same communities appeared repeatedly in newspaper stories. The same fears echoed through families. Parents warned daughters not to hitchhike. Friends promised to call when they arrived safely. Communities organized rides whenever possible. Yet the disappearances continued. What made the situation especially frightening was the randomness. There was no obvious profile. Some victims were teenagers. Others were adults. Some came from indigenous communities. Others did not. Some vanished during daylight. Others disappeared after dark. The only consistent factor seemed to be the highway itself. People began asking difficult questions. Was there a serial killer operating in northern British Columbia? Were multiple predators taking advantage of the same conditions? Were some cases connected while others were not? The uncertainty created a unique kind of fear. A known threat can be avoided. An unknown threat can be anywhere. As the decades passed, the mystery became woven into the identity of the region. Children grew up hearing stories about women who never came home. Families developed routines designed to keep loved ones safe. Communities organized awareness campaigns. Missing person posters appeared on bulletin boards, storefront windows, and community centers. Faces stared back from photographs. Young faces. Hopeful faces. Faces frozen forever at the age they disappeared. Meanwhile, northern British Columbia continued changing. Industries rose and fell. New generations came of age. Roads improved. Technology advanced. Yet many of the unanswered questions remained exactly where they had been years earlier. Waiting. The contrast was striking. The natural beauty of the region attracted tourists from around the world. Travel magazines celebrated the mountains, lakes, and forests. Photographers captured breathtaking landscapes. Visitors described the scenery as peaceful and majestic. For many local families, however, the landscape carried different memories. A mountain might mark the area where search teams once gathered. A forest might conceal a place where remains were discovered. A stretch of road might represent the last known location of a missing daughter. The beauty never disappeared. Neither did the grief. Perhaps that is one reason the Highway of Tears became such a powerful symbol. It embodied a contradiction. A place of extraordinary beauty that also held extraordinary sorrow. A road connecting communities, while simultaneously separating families forever. A landscape capable of inspiring awe and fear at the same time. By the early years of the 21st century, the phrase Highway of Tears had spread far beyond northern British Columbia. The name itself carried emotional weight. It suggested not one tragedy, but many. Not one victim, but generations. Not one investigation, but a continuing search for answers. Journalists began paying greater attention. Advocates demanded action. Families spoke publicly about their experiences. What had once seemed like isolated incidents was increasingly recognized as something larger. Something systemic. Something that demanded examination. Yet despite growing awareness, the mystery remained stubbornly resistant to resolution. The road continued stretching through mountains and forests exactly as it always had. Vehicles continued traveling its length. Communities continued building lives along its path. And somewhere within that landscape existed answers that investigators had spent decades trying to uncover. Answers hidden by time. Answers hidden by distance. Answers hidden by a wilderness vast enough to keep secrets for generations. Before we meet the women whose lives became intertwined with this road, before we explore the investigations and controversies that followed, it is important to understand one final truth about the Highway of Tears. This story is not merely about geography. It is about vulnerability. A road by itself cannot harm anyone. But a road can expose people to danger. A road can create opportunities for predators. A road can reveal the consequences of neglect. And in northern British Columbia, one road would eventually become the setting for one of the most haunting mysteries in Canadian history. For decades, families watched vehicles disappear beyond distant bends in the highway, expecting their loved ones to arrive safely at their destination. Most did. Some never arrived. And with every disappearance, the shadow hanging over Highway 16 grew a little darker. The road was waiting. The mystery was already beginning. And the first of many names would soon be added to a list that Canada has never been able to forget. The tragedy of the Highway of Tears is often told through numbers. 18 official cases, dozens of suspected victims, hundreds of kilometers of highway, more than half a century of unanswered questions. But numbers have a dangerous habit of flattening human lives into statistics. A number cannot tell you what made someone laugh. A number cannot tell you what dreams they carried into the future. A number cannot tell you how a mother's voice sounds when she realizes her child is missing. And a number cannot explain the emptiness left behind when someone never comes home. Before the investigations, before the theories, before the controversies and media attention, there were people. Young women, teenage girls, daughters, sisters, friends, human beings whose lives mattered long before they became part of a mystery. To understand the Highway of Tears, we must first understand them. One of the earliest names associated with the highway is Gloria Moody. In October 1969, Gloria was just 26 years old. She was a member of the Cree Nation and a mother. Like many women whose stories would later become connected to Highway 16, she was not famous. She was not someone who expected to appear in newspapers or become part of a national discussion. She was simply living her life. On an autumn day, Gloria disappeared near Williams Lake in British Columbia. Weeks later, her body was discovered. She had been murdered. At the time, few could have imagined that her death would one day be viewed as part of a much larger and far more disturbing pattern. For her family, however, there was nothing abstract about the tragedy. A daughter was gone. A mother was gone. A life had been violently interrupted. Years would pass. Then decades. The questions surrounding her death would never completely disappear. The same would become true for many others. 20 years after Gloria Moody's death, another young woman would vanish. Her name was Alberta Williams. Those who knew Alberta remembered a young Indigenous woman trying to build a future for herself. She was 24 years old. Like countless people living in northern British Columbia, transportation was a challenge. Traveling between communities often required rides from friends, relatives, or strangers. In August 1989, Alberta was attempting to travel along Highway 16 near Prince Rupert. She never reached her destination. Days later, her body was discovered in a ditch. The wilderness that surrounded the highway had become a crime scene once again. Imagine the moment her family received the news. Imagine the silence that follows words no parent ever wants to hear. Imagine knowing that someone you love left home expecting to return, and instead became another unsolved case. For investigators, Alberta's murder was deeply troubling. For her loved ones, it was devastating. For the region, it was another warning sign. Yet the disappearances and murders continued. By the early 1990s, a new generation of young women was coming of age in northern British Columbia. Among them was a 16-year-old girl named Ramona Wilson. Friends remembered Ramona as energetic and full of life. She laughed easily. She enjoyed spending time with people she cared about. She was still discovering who she wanted to become. Like many teenagers, her future felt limitless. At 16, adulthood seems distant. Life stretches endlessly ahead. Every dream still feels possible. Every year promises new experiences. Ramona should have had decades ahead of her. Instead, she became one of the most recognized faces associated with the Highway of Tears. In June 1994, Ramona left home intending to travel to Smithers. For young people in northern British Columbia, hitchhiking was not unusual. Many had done it before. Many believed they could do so safely. That day, Ramona never arrived. At first, her disappearance seemed impossible to accept. Families often cling to hope during the earliest hours. Maybe she stayed with friends. Maybe plans changed. Maybe she would walk through the front door tomorrow. Then tomorrow becomes the next day. And then the next. Hope slowly collides with fear. Search efforts began. Questions spread through the community. People looked for answers. None appeared. A year later, in April 1995, human remains were discovered in a wooded area near the Smithers Airport. Among those remains was Ramona's skull. The discovery answered one question. Ramona was dead, but it created many more. Who had killed her? Why? Where exactly had the crime occurred? Could it happen again? For Ramona's family, the pain was almost unimaginable. A year of uncertainty ended with a confirmation no one wanted. Yet even then, justice remained elusive. Her murder was never solved. Years later, her family would continue fighting for answers. Her name would become one of the most powerful symbols of the Highway of Tears. Not because she was the only victim, because she represented so many others whose stories received far less attention. Only months after Ramona disappeared, another family would experience a nightmare of their own. Roxanne Thiara was 15 years old. Unlike some victims associated with the highway, Roxanne was not indigenous. She came from a different background. She had different experiences. Yet she would share the same tragic fate. In 1994, Roxanne vanished near Prince George. Weeks later, her body was discovered. She had been murdered. Her case challenged assumptions that a single demographic was being targeted. The danger seemed broader, more unpredictable, more frightening. Parents throughout the region watched the news with growing anxiety. Every disappearance felt personal. Every victim resembled someone they knew. A daughter, a niece, a classmate, a neighbor. By the late 1990s and early 2000s, fear had become woven into everyday life along portions of Highway 16. Young women learned strategies designed to keep themselves safe. They traveled in groups whenever possible. They informed relatives where they were going. They checked in after arriving. Yet despite these precautions, the disappearances continued. Then came one of the most publicized cases in the history of the Highway of Tears. Nicole Hoare was 25 years old. She had recently moved to British Columbia from Alberta. Friends described her as caring, independent, and adventurous. She enjoyed spending time outdoors. She had goals for the future. She was trying to build a life. In June 2002, Nicole was hitchhiking near Prince George. She disappeared. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. Searches were conducted. Posters appeared. Volunteers joined efforts to locate her. The case attracted widespread media attention across Canada. And that attention revealed another painful reality. Many families of Indigenous victims began asking difficult questions. Why had some earlier disappearances received so little coverage? Why had certain cases remained largely unknown outside their communities? Why did it seem that some victims captured national attention, while others struggled to be heard? The discussion surrounding Nicole's disappearance extended beyond the crime itself. It forced Canadians to confront uncomfortable questions about race, visibility, and whose stories society chooses to amplify. Nicole's family, meanwhile, faced the same heartbreak experienced by countless others. They simply wanted answers. They wanted their loved one back. They wanted someone held accountable. They never received those answers. Nicole remains missing. Her case remains unsolved. Another name. Another photograph. Another family waiting. Then there was Aila Sarakoga. She was 14 years old. 14. An age when most teenagers are worrying about school, friendships, and weekend plans. An age when adulthood still feels distant. In February 2006, Aila disappeared after attending a gathering in Prince George. 10 days later, her body was discovered near Highway 16. The brutality of the crime shocked the community. Once again, another family was forced into a grief no parent should ever experience. Once again, another young life ended far too soon. Once again, questions lingered. What is striking about these victims is how ordinary their lives were. Not ordinary in the sense of unimportant. Ordinary in the sense that they resembled millions of other people. They had routines, families, responsibilities, dreams. Some wanted careers. Some wanted families of their own. Some were still figuring out who they wanted to become. None of them expected to become symbols. None of them expected to become part of a national mystery. And yet that is exactly what happened. As the list of victims grew, communities began carrying a collective burden. Every disappearance reopened previous wounds. Every new case reminded families of old losses. Memorials appeared along the highway. Photographs hung in community centers. Candlelight vigils brought people together in grief and solidarity. The faces staring from posters were not strangers. They were members of the community. People remembered their smiles, their voices, their habits, the way they walked into a room, the stories they told. Their absence left spaces that could never be fully filled. One of the most heartbreaking aspects of the Highway of Tears is that many victims shared common vulnerabilities. They often lacked access to reliable transportation. They frequently traveled long distances. They lived in remote regions. Many came from communities facing economic hardship. Predators look for opportunity. The conditions along Highway 16 often provided it. Yet focusing solely on vulnerability risks, overlooking something important. These women were not defined by the circumstances that placed them at risk. They were defined by their humanity. Ramona was more than a missing person case. Nicole was more than a headline. Alberta was more than an investigation. Gloria was more than a statistic. Each life contained thousands of moments invisible to the public. Family dinners, birthday celebrations, private dreams, favorite songs, inside jokes, plans for tomorrow. All of those things vanished when they disappeared. That is the true cost of the Highway of Tears. Not merely the crimes themselves, but the futures stolen, the possibilities erased, the generations altered forever. Because every victim leaves behind people who continue living with the consequences. Parents grow older without answers. Siblings reach milestones that should have been shared. Children grow up without mothers. Communities carry grief from one decade into the next. And somewhere within that grief remains a simple truth. These women were loved, deeply loved, long before the world learned their names. Long before journalists wrote articles about them. Long before investigators assembled case files. They mattered. Their lives mattered. Their stories mattered. And before we examine the events that transformed disappearances into one of Canada's most haunting mysteries, we must remember that the Highway of Tears is ultimately not a story about a road. It is a story about people. People who left home expecting to return. People whose families still search for answers. People whose memories continue to echo across the forests, mountains, and communities of northern British Columbia. Because behind every unsolved case stands a life interrupted. And behind every photograph hanging beside Highway 16 stands a family still waiting for justice. Most true crime stories have a moment when everything changes. A scream heard in the night. A gunshot. A body discovered. A witness who sees something they should not have seen. The Highway of Tears is different. There was no single moment. No single crime. No single night when terror arrived. Instead, the horror unfolded slowly, almost invisibly, over decades. One disappearance at a time. One family at a time. One unanswered question at a time. That is what makes this story so unsettling. The monster was never clearly visible. It existed in fragments. A missing daughter in one town. A murdered woman hundreds of kilometers away. A set of remains discovered years later. A witness report that seemed insignificant at the time. Only when viewed together did the pattern begin to emerge. And by then, many lives had already been lost. Imagine standing beside Highway 16 on a summer afternoon. The sky is bright. Vehicles occasionally pass. The forest stretches endlessly behind you. Nothing appears threatening. Nothing feels dangerous. Yet somewhere within this landscape, countless ordinary days would end in tragedy. For many victims, the final hours began in the most routine way possible. A trip to visit family. A ride into town. A journey home. A plan to meet friends. Simple decisions made thousands of times before. No one wakes up in the morning believing they are living their last day. The victims of the Highway of Tears were no different. They packed bags, made plans, said goodbye, expected to return. Then somewhere along the road, their stories vanished into darkness. One of the most haunting examples was the disappearance of Ramona Wilson. June 1994 began like any other summer month in northern British Columbia. The forests were green. The rivers moved steadily through the valleys. Teenagers were enjoying the freedom that comes with warm weather and long daylight hours. 16-year-old Ramona Wilson was among them. She was young, energetic, and looking forward to the future. Like many young people living in remote communities, she relied on transportation methods that would seem risky to outsiders. Hitchhiking was common, not because people ignored danger, because alternatives often did not exist. At some point during her journey towards Smithers, Ramona disappeared. The exact details remain unknown. That uncertainty is part of what makes her case so disturbing. Investigators cannot reconstruct every minute. No verified witness can describe exactly what happened. There is no definitive timeline revealing her final moments. Instead, there is only a gap. A terrible, permanent gap. One moment she existed within the ordinary flow of life. The next she was gone. As hours turned into days, concern spread through her family and community. People began asking questions. Had anyone seen her? Did she reach her destination? Was she staying with friends? The answers never came. For weeks and months, her family lived in a nightmare familiar to many relatives of missing persons. Every sighting brought hope. Every rumor created possibilities. Every phone call raised expectations. Yet each lead eventually dissolved. The uncertainty became its own form of torture. Then came the discovery. Nearly a year later, human remains were located in a wooded area near the Smithers Airport. The forest that had hidden the truth for months finally surrendered part of its secret. Among the remains was evidence identifying Ramona Wilson. For investigators, the discovery transformed a missing person case into a homicide investigation. For her family, it transformed hope into grief. There would be no reunion. No miraculous return home. Only questions. Questions that remain unanswered decades later. Ramona's story was not unique. That was the terrifying reality. Again and again, women disappeared under circumstances that seemed alarmingly similar. Many were last seen traveling along Highway 16. Many were vulnerable because of transportation challenges. Many vanished without witnesses. Many left behind families, desperately searching for explanations. Years before Ramona's disappearance, Alberta Williams experienced a similar fate. In August 1989, Alberta was attempting to travel near Prince Rupert. At 24 years old, she was building her life and looking ahead to the future. Like countless others in northern British Columbia, she depended on available transportation options. Somewhere during her journey, something happened. The exact sequence of events remains unclear. What investigators know is that Alberta never reached safety. Days later, her body was discovered near the highway. The wilderness had become a crime scene once again. Picture the scene from the perspective of those who found her. The quiet road, the surrounding forest, the realization that a human life had ended violently in a place where few witnesses existed. Such discoveries leave lasting impressions on investigators, even more so on families. Every homicide creates ripples of grief. Unsolved homicides create ripples that never fully disappear. Then there was Nicole Hoare. Her case would eventually draw national attention and become one of the defining mysteries of the Highway of Tears. By 2002, concerns about disappearances along Highway 16 were already growing. Families were worried. Communities were alert. The danger was no longer entirely invisible. Yet awareness alone could not eliminate vulnerability. Nicole was 25 years old when she disappeared. Friends described her as independent and adventurous. She had recently relocated and was working toward building a future for herself. In June of that year, she was last seen hitchhiking near Prince George. Witnesses reported seeing her standing along the highway. Then the trail ended. Imagine those final confirmed moments. Vehicles moving past. Drivers glancing briefly at a young woman waiting for a ride. Nobody realizing they may be witnessing the last known sighting. Nobody understanding that a future investigation would examine every detail of that moment. Within hours, Nicole simply vanished. Search teams mobilized. Volunteers joined efforts. Police followed leads. Media organizations reported extensively on the case. Yet despite enormous attention, no definitive answer emerged. Nicole seemed to dissolve into the landscape itself. No confirmed remains. No arrest. No resolution. Only uncertainty. For her family, each passing year became another chapter in a story without an ending. The disappearance of Ayala Saracoga in 2006 delivered another devastating blow to northern communities. At 14 years old, Ayala was still a child. The age alone makes her story especially heartbreaking. Teenagers should be planning dances, school events, and future careers. They should not become homicide victims. After attending a gathering in Prince George, Ayala disappeared. Days later, her body was found near Highway 16. Unlike some earlier cases, investigators eventually secured a conviction related to her murder. Yet even with an identified perpetrator, her death reinforced a frightening truth. The dangers surrounding the highway were not imaginary. Families had been warning about them for years. The risk was real, and it continued claiming lives. As more cases accumulated, people began noticing recurring elements. Victims often disappeared while traveling alone. Many relied on hitchhiking. Many vanished near isolated stretches of road. Many were young women. Many left behind almost no evidence. For investigators, these similarities raised critical questions. Were the cases connected? Was one predator responsible? Were multiple offenders operating independently? The answers remained elusive. Part of the difficulty stemmed from geography. A crime occurring in a major city generates witnesses, security cameras, traffic footage, business records, potential sources of evidence. The Highway of Tears offered very few of those advantages. Large portions of the corridor passed through wilderness. Witnesses were scarce. Evidence deteriorated quickly. Weather erased traces. Time destroyed opportunities. A person could disappear between communities and leave investigators with almost nothing. This reality complicated every investigation. But geography alone could not explain everything. Many families believed another factor contributed to the tragedy. They believed some disappearances were not treated with the urgency they deserved, particularly when victims were Indigenous women. Family members frequently described feeling ignored during critical early stages. Some recalled being told their loved ones would probably return. Others felt investigators underestimated the danger. Whether those perceptions reflected individual decisions or broader systemic issues, the impact was profound. Trust eroded. Frustration grew. Communities began demanding accountability. Because from their perspective, the pattern had become impossible to ignore. The horror of the Highway of Tears was not confined to physical violence. It also existed in uncertainty. A murder is devastating. A disappearance can be even crueler. When a body is never found, families remain trapped between hope and despair. Part of them fears the worst. Part of them refuses to stop believing. Every unidentified set of remains becomes a possibility. Every news report sparks renewed anxiety. Every anniversary reopens old wounds. The psychological burden can last a lifetime. Some parents of missing women died without learning what happened to their daughters. Some siblings spent decades searching for answers. Some communities carried collective grief from one generation into the next. As the years passed, the Highway of Tears evolved from a regional concern into a national symbol. The disappearances could no longer be viewed as isolated incidents. The accumulation of cases created a disturbing narrative. Young women kept vanishing. Families kept suffering. Investigations kept stalling. Answers remained scarce. And perhaps most frightening of all, no one could say with certainty when the next disappearance would occur. That uncertainty changed behavior throughout northern British Columbia. Parents became more protective. Communities organized transportation initiatives. Warning signs appeared. Awareness campaigns emerged. Yet none of those efforts could erase what had already happened. Every victim left behind a story interrupted mid-sentence. Every disappearance represented a future stolen. And every unsolved case added another layer to the growing shadow hanging over Highway 16. What transformed the Highway of Tears from a collection of crimes into one of Canada's most haunting mysteries was not merely the violence itself. It was repetition. The relentless repetition. Year after year. Decade after decade. Different names. Different faces. The same road. The same fear. The same unanswered questions. By the time authorities fully recognized the scale of the problem, the tragedy had already become deeply embedded within the history of northern British Columbia. The road continued carrying travelers. The forests continued growing. The mountains continued standing silently over the landscape. But beneath that ordinary surface lay a reality impossible to ignore. Too many women had disappeared. Too many families were grieving. Too many mysteries remained unsolved. And somewhere within those mysteries, hidden among decades of missing evidence, fading memories, and isolated crime scenes, existed the truth. A truth that investigators had not yet found. A truth that families desperately needed. A truth buried somewhere along the Highway of Tears. Every investigation begins with a question. Where did they go? For most missing person cases, investigators hope the answer lies somewhere close to the victim's last known location. A friend knows something. A witness remembers a face. A security camera captures a crucial moment. A phone call provides a lead. On the Highway of Tears, those expectations often collided with a brutal reality. There was no camera footage. There were few witnesses. There were vast stretches of wilderness capable of swallowing evidence whole. And there was time. Far too much time. By the moment many investigators realized a disappearance might be connected to something darker, precious hours had already slipped away. The first challenge was always geography. Imagine receiving a report that someone disappeared somewhere along a corridor stretching hundreds of kilometers through mountains, forests, rivers, and isolated communities. Where do you begin? Which section of road matters? Which vehicle matters? Which witness matters? The scale alone was overwhelming. For families, the waiting was unbearable. For investigators, the search often felt like looking for a single footprint in an ocean of trees. When Ramona Wilson disappeared in June 1994, those challenges became painfully clear. At first, there was uncertainty. Missing person investigations often begin with possibilities that have nothing to do with crime. Teenagers sometimes stay with friends. Travel plans change. Miscommunications happen. Families hope for ordinary explanations because the alternatives are terrifying. But as days passed without contact, concern deepened. Search efforts began. People retraced possible routes. Friends were interviewed. Community members shared rumors and sightings. The problem was that Ramona's last confirmed movements offered little certainty. Some believed they had seen her. Others were unsure. Every potential lead seemed to dissolve under scrutiny. The highway offered countless opportunities for someone to disappear. Every passing vehicle became a possibility. Every unfamiliar driver became a question mark. Weeks turned into months. The trail grew colder. Then came the discovery that changed everything. In April 1995, human remains were located in a wooded area near the Smithers Airport. The location itself revealed one of the most troubling realities facing investigators. The remains were hidden in terrain difficult to search and easy to overlook. Forests conceal. Forests protect secrets. Forests erase evidence. By the time investigators arrived, nature had already altered the scene. Weather had done its work. Animals had done theirs. The passage of time had transformed what might once have been a rich crime scene into something far more fragile. Investigators documented every detail they could. Photographs were taken. Evidence was collected. Forensic specialists examined what remained. But crucial questions persisted. Where had Ramona actually been killed? Was this the primary crime scene, or simply a disposal site? How long had the remains been there? Had anyone seen suspicious activity nearby? The answers remained frustratingly elusive. And that pattern would repeat itself again and again. Many of the discoveries associated with the Highway of Tears shared similar characteristics. Victims were often located far from witnesses, far from surveillance, far from the places where investigators could easily reconstruct events. The wilderness became an obstacle at every stage. Even locating remains was extraordinarily difficult. Search teams frequently faced impossible conditions. Dense vegetation restricted visibility. Rough terrain slowed movement. Extreme weather complicated operations. A search area that appears manageable on a map can become enormous when experienced on foot. Investigators could spend days combing forests without finding a single useful clue. Families often joined searches themselves. Parents walked trails. Siblings distributed posters. Volunteers searched ditches, riverbanks, and logging roads. Hope drove them forward. Hope and desperation. Many knew the odds were poor. Yet stopping felt impossible. As long as answers remained out there somewhere, people continued looking. The disappearance of Nicole Hoare in 2002 generated one of the largest search efforts in the history of the Highway of Tears. Nicole's case attracted substantial media attention. Public awareness increased dramatically. Volunteers arrived from multiple communities. Search teams covered enormous areas. Aircraft scanned remote terrain from above. Dogs tracked potential scent trails. Investigators pursued hundreds of leads. Yet despite the scale of the operation, the outcome remained painfully familiar. No definitive answers. No confirmed suspect. No clear explanation. Investigators found themselves confronting the same obstacle that had haunted previous cases. There simply was not enough evidence. At least not enough evidence pointing in a single direction. Witnesses reported seeing Nicole hitchhiking. Some believed they saw vehicles stop. Others offered descriptions that conflicted with one another. Human memory is imperfect. Days after an event, recollections begin to shift. Months later, certainty becomes even harder to establish. Investigators had to separate useful information from speculation. That task became increasingly difficult as public attention grew. Every new theory generated more leads. Every lead demanded resources. Every resource had limits. The problem extended beyond individual cases. As investigators reviewed multiple disappearances, similarities began emerging. Young women, transportation challenges, remote locations, unsolved outcomes. But similarities alone do not prove connections. Coincidences happen. Patterns can be misleading. Investigators needed evidence. Evidence remained scarce. Then there were the discoveries that raised more questions than answers. Human remains occasionally surfaced years after a disappearance. Sometimes hikers made the discovery. Sometimes hunters. Sometimes workers operating in remote areas. Each discovery triggered a new wave of activity. Crime scene specialists arrived. Forensic examinations began. Families received devastating phone calls. Yet the same problem persisted. Time had often destroyed much of the available evidence. Imagine trying to solve a homicide years after it occurred. The landscape has changed. Witnesses have moved away. Memories have faded. Physical traces have deteriorated. Potential suspects have disappeared into the population. The investigation begins already at a disadvantage. That disadvantage became one of the defining characteristics of the Highway of Tears. Many cases started with missing persons. By the time investigators confirmed foul play, valuable opportunities had already vanished. Families noticed this. Communities noticed this. And over time, frustration grew. Many relatives believed authorities had failed to act aggressively enough during critical early periods. Some questioned whether different decisions could have produced different outcomes. Could evidence have been preserved? Could witnesses have been identified sooner? Could lives have been saved? These questions became part of the larger controversy surrounding the Highway of Tears. Trust between communities and law enforcement became increasingly strained, particularly within indigenous communities. Many families felt their concerns were not taken seriously enough. Some described encounters with authorities that left them feeling dismissed. Others believed systemic biases influenced investigative priorities. Whether every criticism was justified or not, the perception itself carried enormous consequences. People became less willing to trust official processes, less willing to believe answers would come, less willing to remain silent. As pressure mounted, investigators began examining the possibility that some disappearances might be linked. This introduced an entirely new challenge. What exactly constituted a connection? A common suspect? A common method? A common geographic area? The Highway of Tears covered such a large region that establishing meaningful links was difficult. Some victims disappeared decades apart. Some cases involved confirmed homicides. Others involved missing persons whose fates remained unknown. Some victims shared demographic similarities. Others did not. The complexity was staggering. Investigators found themselves standing before a giant puzzle with most of the pieces missing. Every potential connection required careful analysis. Every theory demanded scrutiny. And every mistake risked sending resources in the wrong direction. Meanwhile, the public increasingly embraced one possibility. A serial killer. The theory seemed logical. The same highway. Multiple victims. Years of disappearances. It felt like the kind of pattern associated with a single predator. But reality is rarely that simple. Investigators remained cautious. Some evidence supported the serial killer theory. Other evidence challenged it. Certain cases appeared connected. Others seemed entirely different. The deeper investigators looked, the less certainty they possessed. And uncertainty can be dangerous. It creates space for rumors, speculation, fear. Across northern British Columbia, stories spread rapidly. People discussed suspicious vehicles, suspicious individuals, unconfirmed sightings, possible suspects. Every community seemed to have its own theory. Every family carried its own suspicions. The atmosphere became one of lingering anxiety. Parents warned daughters to avoid traveling alone. Young women adjusted routines. Communities attempted to create informal transportation networks. People understood something was wrong, even if they could not explain exactly what. One particularly difficult aspect of these investigations involved the lack of forensic evidence. Modern criminal investigations often rely heavily on DNA, digital records, cell phone data, surveillance footage. Many Highway of Tears cases originated before those tools became widely available. Investigators were forced to rely on traditional methods. Witness interviews, physical evidence, timelines, circumstantial connections. When evidence was limited, progress slowed dramatically. Some investigations reached apparent dead ends. Case files grew thicker, while answers remained absent. Years passed. Detectives retired. New investigators inherited old mysteries. Boxes of documents accumulated. Photographs aged. Leads went cold. Families continued waiting. The emotional weight of those unresolved cases affected investigators as well. Many officers spent years pursuing answers they never found. They attended meetings with grieving relatives. They reviewed photographs of victims. They revisited crime scenes. They carried the burden of knowing that someone remained free. Somewhere, perhaps living an ordinary life. Perhaps watching the investigations unfold from a distance. Perhaps confident they would never be identified. That possibility haunted many involved in the cases. Because every unsolved crime creates two victims. The person who was harmed, and the truth itself. The truth becomes buried beneath uncertainty, hidden behind missing evidence and unanswered questions. For decades, that truth remained hidden along Highway 16. Investigators kept searching. Families kept hoping. Communities kept demanding action. But despite countless hours of work, the mystery only seemed to grow larger. Every discovery created new questions. Every lead generated new possibilities. Every investigation revealed how much remained unknown. The forests continued standing. The highway continued stretching across northern British Columbia. And somewhere within that immense landscape, among years of disappearances and scattered clues, lay the answers investigators desperately needed. The problem was that nobody knew where to find them. And without a breakthrough, the Highway of Tears risked becoming exactly what families feared most. Not a mystery waiting to be solved, but a mystery destined to remain unsolved forever. By the time investigators and communities began fully grasping the scale of the Highway of Tears, another disturbing realization emerged. The mystery was not only about missing women. It was also about missing answers. For every victim whose name became known, there seemed to be dozens of theories. For every theory, there appeared to be another contradiction. The deeper investigators dug into the disappearances, the more they found themselves trapped inside a maze of possibilities, dead ends, and unanswered questions. Unlike many criminal investigations, there was no single suspect sitting at the center of the story. No obvious villain whose photograph appeared on every bulletin board. No dramatic arrest that suddenly connected every case. Instead, investigators found themselves facing something far more frustrating. Too many suspects. Too many possibilities. Too many roads leading nowhere. As public attention intensified throughout the 1990s and early 2000s, one theory dominated conversations across British Columbia. A serial killer. The idea seemed almost unavoidable. Women disappeared along the same highway. The crime stretched across decades. The victims often shared similar vulnerabilities. The pattern felt familiar to anyone who had studied serial homicide. Communities began imagining a predator moving silently between towns, selecting victims and vanishing back into the wilderness. Parents feared it. Journalists wrote about it. Families wondered if the same person responsible for one disappearance might also be responsible for another. Investigators examined the possibility carefully. At first glance, it seemed plausible. But when detectives started comparing individual cases, complications appeared immediately. The victims varied significantly in age. Some cases involved confirmed murders. Others involved disappearances where no remains had ever been found. Some crimes occurred decades apart. Methods appeared inconsistent. Crime scenes differed. Victim backgrounds differed. The timeline itself raised difficult questions. Could a single offender realistically remain active for so many years without detection? It was possible, but possible did not mean probable. The more investigators examined the evidence, the more uncertain they became. Then there were the convicted killers. Over the years, law enforcement examined numerous violent offenders who had lived, traveled, or worked in northern British Columbia. Whenever a dangerous criminal was arrested, investigators inevitably asked the same question. Could this person be connected to the Highway of Tears? One name repeatedly surfaced in public discussions. Bobby Jack Fowler. Fowler was an American serial killer whose history immediately attracted attention. He had committed violent crimes against women. He had traveled through Western Canada. His behavior fit certain aspects of what investigators feared. For years, many people believed Fowler might be responsible for multiple Highway of Tears murders. The theory gained even more attention after DNA evidence linked him to the murder of one woman associated with the corridor. For a moment, it seemed investigators might finally have found a crucial piece of the puzzle. Families allowed themselves cautious hope. Perhaps one killer had been identified. Perhaps several cases could finally be solved. But the optimism faded. Although evidence connected Fowler to at least one victim, it failed to explain the majority of disappearances. The highway mystery remained far larger than any single offender. Investigators were back where they started. One answer. Dozens of questions. Another suspect emerged. Then another. Then another. Truck drivers were scrutinized. Transient workers were examined. Known sex offenders became persons of interest. Violent criminals with regional connections were investigated. Every time a potential suspect appeared, detectives followed the same process. Where were they living? What vehicles did they drive? Could they be placed near a victim? Did forensic evidence exist? Did witness descriptions match? Most of the time, the trail ended abruptly. Sometimes alibis checked out. Sometimes evidence was insufficient. Sometimes the connection existed only in speculation. Investigators repeatedly found themselves confronting the same obstacle. Suspicion is not proof. A theory is not evidence. And without evidence, cases remain unsolved. The public, meanwhile, often saw things differently. Rumors spread rapidly throughout northern communities. A stranger moving into town attracted attention. An unusual vehicle became a topic of conversation. People exchanged stories at restaurants, gas stations, and community events. Some stories contained kernels of truth. Others evolved through repetition. The problem was that fear has a way of filling empty spaces. When answers are absent, speculation rushes in. Families often received tips from well-meaning strangers. A sighting here. A rumor there. A suspicious individual remembered years later. Investigators documented every lead. Most led nowhere. Yet they had no choice but to examine them. The possibility of overlooking something important was too great. One of the most difficult aspects of the Highway of Tears investigation involved understanding opportunity. The highway itself created opportunities for predators. Thousands of vehicles traveled the route every year. Truckers, tourists, workers, locals, visitors. Any one of them could potentially encounter a vulnerable traveler. That reality complicated profiling efforts. Investigators could not simply focus on residents of one town. Potential suspects might come from anywhere. They might live hundreds of kilometers away. They might pass through only occasionally. They might never attract attention. The geographic scope transformed an already difficult investigation into an enormous challenge. Then came another uncomfortable possibility. What if there wasn't one killer? What if there were several? This theory gradually gained traction among investigators. The more cases they examined, the more differences they noticed. Victimology varied. Crime scene characteristics varied. Timelines varied. Perhaps the Highway of Tears was not a single mystery at all. Perhaps it was multiple mysteries sharing the same geography. If that theory was correct, the implications were disturbing. Instead of hunting one predator, investigators might be dealing with several unrelated offenders. Different motives, different methods, different victims, different timelines. The road itself could be the only common factor. For families, this possibility was both frightening and frustrating. A single serial killer offered a clear target. Multiple offenders created chaos. The path toward justice became harder to define. Some cases added another layer of complexity. Certain disappearances showed no obvious evidence of homicide. Investigators suspected foul play, but suspicion alone could not establish what had happened. A person might have accepted a ride. They might have encountered violence, or something entirely different. Without remains, without witnesses, without physical evidence, certainty remained out of reach. These ambiguous cases became some of the most painful for families. The absence of answers created endless possibilities. Some hopeful, most terrifying. Years passed. Theories evolved. Investigators retired. New detectives inherited old files. Each generation of investigators approached the cases with fresh eyes. Each generation discovered the same frustrating reality. There was no shortage of suspects. There was a shortage of proof. As public scrutiny increased, attention also turned toward institutional failures. Families began asking whether investigative decisions themselves had contributed to the mystery. Could earlier action have prevented later crimes? Could stronger communication between jurisdictions have revealed patterns sooner? Could vulnerable women have received better protection? These questions generated heated debate. Some investigators defended the work performed under difficult circumstances. Others acknowledged mistakes had occurred. Regardless of perspective, one fact remained undeniable. Many families felt abandoned. That perception became almost as significant as the crimes themselves. Trust between communities and law enforcement suffered, particularly within indigenous communities, where historical tensions already existed. When a loved one disappeared, families often carried two burdens simultaneously: the fear of what happened, and the fear that nobody would fight hard enough to discover the truth. This emotional divide complicated investigations even further. Witnesses were sometimes reluctant to come forward. Communities became skeptical. Relationships deteriorated. In many ways, the Highway of Tears became more than a criminal investigation. It became a crisis of confidence. A crisis involving justice, accountability, and trust. Meanwhile, detectives continued pursuing every possible lead. Some suspects appeared promising before collapsing under scrutiny. Others lingered in the background for years. Investigative boards filled with photographs. Maps displayed timelines. Case files expanded. Names accumulated. But the breakthrough everyone wanted remained elusive. Perhaps the most haunting aspect of this stage of the story was the realization that predators understood the highway's vulnerabilities. Anyone familiar with the region knew how isolated certain stretches could be. Anyone familiar with the terrain knew how difficult searches could become. Anyone familiar with local transportation challenges understood why hitchhikers remained vulnerable. A predator did not need extraordinary intelligence to exploit those conditions. They simply needed opportunity. And along portions of Highway 16, opportunity existed in abundance. That realization forced investigators to confront a painful possibility. The road itself may have attracted offenders, not because it possessed any mystical quality, because it offered practical advantages: isolation, distance, limited witnesses, limited transportation, limited surveillance, everything a predator desires. As investigators revisited old case files, another troubling pattern emerged. Some disappearances that initially seemed unrelated began sharing subtle similarities. Small details, overlapping locations, common circumstances. Nothing definitive, just enough to raise questions. Those questions fueled new investigations, new task forces, new reviews. Hope returned periodically, then faded. Again and again, families became accustomed to the cycle. A promising lead emerged. Media coverage intensified. Optimism spread. Then silence returned. The emotional toll was immense. Imagine living through decades of uncertainty while repeatedly hearing that answers might finally be coming. Imagine the disappointment each time those answers failed to arrive. That disappointment became part of life for many Highway of Tears families. By the early 2000s, one conclusion had become unavoidable. Traditional investigations alone were not enough. The scale of the mystery demanded something larger, something more coordinated, something capable of examining multiple cases simultaneously rather than individually. The existing approach had produced fragments. What investigators needed now was a broader perspective, a way to step back and view the entire landscape. Not just one disappearance, not just one victim, the whole pattern, the whole corridor, the whole mystery. Because somewhere hidden among decades of case files, witness statements, forensic reports, and family testimonies lay connections that had not yet been fully understood. The question was whether investigators could find them before even more time slipped away. The Highway of Tears had already claimed too many lives. Too many families had spent too many years waiting. And unless something changed, the growing list of suspects and theories risked becoming exactly that. A list. Nothing more. No justice. No closure. No answers. Just names fading into old files while the truth remained hidden somewhere beyond the next bend in the highway. For years, the Highway of Tears felt like a puzzle missing most of its pieces. Investigators had names. They had photographs. They had grieving families. They had thousands of pages of reports. What they did not have were answers. The disappearances stretched across decades. Witnesses came and went. Evidence degraded. Leads collapsed. Entire investigations seemed trapped in an endless cycle of hope and disappointment. By the early 2000s, many families had begun to fear the worst. Perhaps the truth would never be known. Perhaps the women whose faces stared from missing person posters would become permanent mysteries. Perhaps the road itself would win. But history shows that even the coldest cases can shift unexpectedly. Sometimes a forgotten witness remembers something important. Sometimes new technology reveals evidence hidden for years. Sometimes investigators finally step back and recognize patterns that were invisible before. And on the Highway of Tears, a turning point was beginning to emerge. Not a dramatic breakthrough involving a single fingerprint. Not a surprise confession. Not a detective suddenly identifying one killer. The breakthrough would be larger than that. It would be a recognition that the problem itself had been underestimated. For years, many cases had been investigated separately. One missing woman. One murder. One file. One detective. One community. But families had long argued that the disappearances were connected by something deeper. Whether one killer existed or not, the victims shared common circumstances. The same road. The same vulnerabilities. The same failures. The same unanswered questions. Eventually authorities were forced to acknowledge that individual investigations were not enough. A broader approach was needed. A coordinated effort. A task force capable of looking at the entire corridor rather than isolated incidents. That realization led to one of the most significant developments in the history of the Highway of Tears. In 2005, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police launched Project EPANA. For many families, the announcement represented the first genuine sign that authorities were beginning to understand the scale of the crisis. The name itself carried symbolism. The project would not focus on a single victim. It would focus on a pattern. Investigators selected a group of cases believed to share important similarities. Women and girls who had disappeared or been found murdered near Highway 16 and surrounding regions. The goal was simple in theory. Review everything. Re-examine evidence. Compare timelines. Search for connections. Identify suspects. Find answers. In practice, it would become one of the largest and most challenging investigations in Canadian history. Dozens of investigators were assigned. Case files were reopened. Witness statements were reviewed. Old evidence was reanalyzed using modern forensic techniques. Boxes of documents that had sat untouched for years suddenly became important again. Detectives spent countless hours reconstructing events that had occurred decades earlier. The process was exhausting. Some witnesses had died. Others had moved away. Many memories had faded. Yet investigators pushed forward. Because for the first time, they were not examining a single disappearance. They were studying an entire landscape of tragedy. Patterns began emerging. Some were expected. Others were surprising. Investigators confirmed what communities had been saying for years. Many victims shared common risk factors. Limited transportation. Remote locations. Isolation. Reliance on hitchhiking. Economic hardship. These factors created opportunities that predators could exploit. The findings were deeply unsettling, because they suggested that the Highway of Tears was not simply a collection of random crimes. The road itself had become part of the problem. At the same time, advances in forensic science offered new possibilities. DNA technology had improved dramatically since many of the original investigations. Evidence once considered insignificant could now yield valuable information. Investigators revisited old exhibits. Hair samples. Biological traces. Clothing. Recovered items. Anything that might provide a breakthrough. For families, every announcement generated cautious optimism. Perhaps this time would be different. Perhaps technology would succeed where earlier investigations had failed. Perhaps someone had left behind evidence they never realized existed. Then came one of the most important developments in the entire Highway of Tears story. Investigators identified a connection between one victim and an American serial killer named Bobby Jack Fowler. Fowler was not an unknown figure. He had a documented history of violence against women. His criminal record painted the picture of a dangerous predator. After his death, DNA evidence linked him to the murder of one Highway of Tears victim. The revelation sent shockwaves through investigators and families alike. For years, people had speculated that a serial killer might be operating along the corridor. Now there was proof that at least one known serial murderer had indeed crossed paths with the mystery. The significance of the discovery cannot be overstated. For the first time, investigators possessed something concrete. Not a rumor, not a theory. Evidence. Actual evidence linking a dangerous offender to one of the crimes. Yet the breakthrough created a new problem. It answered one question while leaving dozens unresolved. Could Fowler be responsible for multiple victims? Possibly. Could he explain every disappearance? Almost certainly not. The timeline was too broad. The victim profiles were too varied. The circumstances were too different. The road remained larger than any single suspect. Nevertheless, the Fowler connection changed the investigation. It proved that some of the fears communities had carried for years were justified. Predators had indeed been operating in the region. The danger was real. The threat was not imaginary. And if one serial killer had used the corridor, investigators had to consider the possibility that others had done the same. Meanwhile, another breakthrough was occurring outside traditional police work. Families were becoming impossible to ignore. For decades, many relatives had fought for recognition. They organized gatherings, held vigils, created awareness campaigns, spoke to journalists, demanded accountability, refused to allow their daughters and sisters to be forgotten. Slowly, their voices began reaching a national audience. The Highway of Tears transformed from a regional issue into a national conversation. Canadians who had never visited northern British Columbia suddenly learned about the disappearances. Documentaries were produced. Books were written. Political leaders faced increasing pressure. Public awareness expanded dramatically. In some ways, this may have been the most important breakthrough of all. Because before a problem can be solved, it must first be acknowledged. For years, many families believed their loved ones had been overlooked. Now the country was paying attention. The discussion also expanded beyond criminal investigations. Experts began examining the social conditions surrounding the disappearances. Why were so many women forced to hitchhike? Why was transportation infrastructure inadequate? Why were Indigenous women disproportionately represented among victims? Why had some families struggled to receive attention when reporting disappearances? These questions shifted the conversation. The Highway of Tears was no longer viewed solely as a mystery about offenders. It was also becoming a story about vulnerability. A story about systems. A story about communities asking why so many warning signs had gone unaddressed. The more people examined the issue, the more complex it became. Yet complexity did not erase progress. For the first time in decades, momentum existed. Investigators were sharing information. Families were being heard. Technology was advancing. The public was engaged. The silence surrounding the highway had been broken. Of course, not every breakthrough leads directly to justice. That is one of the hardest lessons in true crime. Sometimes new evidence creates more questions. Sometimes major investigations produce only partial answers. Sometimes the truth remains frustratingly incomplete. The Highway of Tears would prove no exception. Despite years of work, many cases remained unsolved. Many families continued waiting. Many questions persisted. But something fundamental had changed. The disappearances were no longer isolated stories buried in forgotten files. They had become part of a larger search for truth. A search involving investigators, journalists, advocates, Indigenous communities, and families united by a common goal. Find out what happened. No matter how long it takes. No matter how difficult the journey becomes. As investigators moved forward, another challenge awaited them. Evidence and awareness alone could not deliver justice. Eventually, someone would have to stand accused. Someone would have to face a courtroom. Someone would have to answer for at least part of the suffering that had haunted Highway 16 for generations. Whether those answers would be enough remained uncertain. Because the tragedy of the Highway of Tears had already grown far beyond the boundaries of any single case. It had become a wound carried by entire communities. A wound that would not heal easily. A wound still demanding justice. And in the years ahead, that demand would echo from courtrooms to government inquiries, from family gatherings to national headlines, forcing Canada to confront not only the crimes themselves, but everything that had allowed them to happen. Most true crime stories eventually arrive at a courtroom. After months or years of investigation, prosecutors stand before a judge. Evidence is presented. Witnesses testify. A jury deliberates. A verdict is announced. The ending may be tragic. The ending may be imperfect. But there is usually an ending. The Highway of Tears refused to follow that pattern. That is what makes the story so painful. When people think of justice, they often imagine certainty. A guilty verdict. A prison sentence. A name attached to a crime. Families finally receiving answers. But for much of the Highway of Tears, certainty never arrived. Instead, justice came in fragments. Partial victories. Incomplete answers. Moments of accountability surrounded by vast areas of unresolved grief. For decades, families waited for the courtroom scenes they had imagined countless times. They pictured prosecutors explaining what happened. They imagined hearing a killer's name. They imagined finally understanding the final moments of their daughters, sisters, and mothers. Instead, many sat through years of silence. Years became decades. Investigations continued. Evidence was reviewed. Task forces expanded. Yet the seats reserved for defendants often remained empty. The absence itself became part of the tragedy. Still, there were moments when justice appeared within reach. One of the most significant developments involved the identification of Bobby Jack Fowler. For years, investigators suspected that violent offenders may have traveled through northern British Columbia, exploiting the isolation of Highway 16. The challenge was proving it. When forensic evidence eventually connected Fowler to the murder of one woman associated with the Highway of Tears corridor, investigators finally achieved something that had seemed impossible. A known serial killer had been linked directly to the mystery. The discovery validated years of fears. Families had long believed predators were operating along the highway. Now there was proof. Yet the breakthrough carried a cruel limitation. Fowler was already dead. There would be no arrest, no extradition, no dramatic courtroom-confrontation, no opportunity for prosecutors to question him, no chance for families to look into his eyes and hear explanations. Justice, in the traditional sense, was impossible. The evidence established responsibility for one crime, but it could not create accountability. That distinction mattered deeply to families. Knowing who committed a crime is important. Watching that person answer for it is something else entirely. The opportunity had been lost forever. And even more frustratingly, the Fowler connection did not solve the larger mystery. The Highway of Tears remained filled with unanswered cases. Dozens of families were still waiting. Dozens of names still appeared on memorials and missing person posters. The road continued carrying secrets. Then there was the case of Aila Saracoga. Unlike many Highway of Tears victims, Aila's murder eventually led to a conviction. Her death had shocked northern British Columbia. She was only 14 years old. The brutality of the crime horrified investigators and communities alike. As evidence accumulated, authorities arrested a suspect named Cody Lejbokoff. What followed represented something families along Highway 16 rarely experienced. A criminal trial. A public examination of evidence. A legal process moving toward resolution. Courtrooms possess a strange atmosphere. The rooms are quiet, orderly, controlled. Yet beneath that calm surface exist extraordinary emotions. Grief, anger, fear, hope. In homicide trials, every piece of evidence carries enormous weight. Photographs become memories. Documents become voices. Witness testimony becomes a bridge connecting the living and the dead. For Aila's family, the trial represented a painful opportunity. Painful because it required revisiting the worst experience of their lives. An opportunity because it offered the possibility of justice. Prosecutors presented evidence. Investigators explained findings. Witnesses described events. The defense challenged conclusions. The legal system moved forward one step at a time. Unlike so many other Highway of Tears cases, this story would not end with uncertainty. The jury found Lejbokoff guilty. He received a life sentence. For many observers, the conviction carried significance beyond a single case. It demonstrated that predators operating in northern British Columbia could be identified. They could be prosecuted. They could be held accountable. Justice was possible. But even that victory contained limitations. Lejbokoff was convicted for crimes linked to specific victims. He was not the answer to the entire Highway of Tears mystery. No single offender ever was. Every conviction seemed to illuminate one corner of the darkness, while leaving the rest untouched. Families recognized this reality immediately. One successful prosecution did not explain decades of disappearances. One life sentence did not answer countless unresolved questions. One courtroom victory could not erase generations of grief. As years passed, another form of justice began emerging. Not criminal justice, public justice. The growing recognition that many families had been failed. Throughout inquiries, public discussions, and investigative reviews, attention increasingly focused on systemic issues surrounding the disappearances. Families described their experiences reporting loved ones missing. Advocates highlighted gaps in transportation infrastructure. Researchers examined patterns involving violence against Indigenous women. Journalists uncovered stories that had received little attention when they first occurred. Gradually, the national conversation shifted. The Highway of Tears was no longer viewed solely as a collection of crimes. It was also viewed as a reflection of broader failures. Failures involving protection. Failures involving response. Failures involving equality. This shift created a different kind of accountability. Government agencies faced scrutiny. Law enforcement practices were examined. Public institutions were asked difficult questions. Communities demanded answers. In some ways, these discussions became a courtroom of their own. Not one involving judges and juries. One involving society itself. Who had been overlooked? Why had warnings gone unheeded? Why had so many families struggled to be heard? Those questions became impossible to ignore. For Indigenous families, the issue carried particular significance. Many believed their loved ones had not received the same urgency or attention afforded to others. Whether discussing investigations, media coverage, or public awareness, the perception of unequal treatment became a recurring theme. The emotional impact was profound. Imagine losing a daughter. Then imagine feeling as though the world barely noticed. That pain fueled decades of activism, decades of advocacy, decades of determination. Families refused to let names disappear into forgotten files. And eventually, their persistence forced the country to pay attention. Memorial walks were organized. Community gatherings were held. Photographs of victims appeared at public events. The women of the Highway of Tears became symbols not only of tragedy, but also of resilience. Because every family who continued fighting for answers represented an act of resistance against forgetting. Yet despite increased awareness, the courtroom remained absent for many victims. No suspects. No arrests. No prosecutions. No verdicts. Just silence. That silence weighs heavily on unresolved cases. People often assume closure arrives when enough time passes. Families know otherwise. Time changes grief. It does not eliminate it. Parents continue wondering. Siblings continue searching. Communities continue remembering. The absence of justice becomes a permanent companion. Investigators felt that burden as well. Many detectives spent years pursuing leads that never produced arrests. Some retired carrying unanswered questions. Others passed case files to younger investigators. The search continued, generation after generation. Because no matter how much time passed, the obligation remained. Someone had done these things. Someone knew the truth. And somewhere, that truth still existed. The challenge was uncovering it. By the second decade of the 21st century, public awareness of the Highway of Tears had reached levels unimaginable decades earlier. The cases had become part of national discussions regarding missing and murdered Indigenous women. Reports were published. Recommendations were issued. Political leaders spoke publicly about the crisis. Families who once felt ignored found themselves standing at the center of a national conversation. That recognition mattered, not because it solved the cases, because it acknowledged the victims. Acknowledgement is not justice, but it is a step toward it. Recognition does not replace accountability, but it can create momentum, and momentum can lead to change. Perhaps the most honest truth about justice in the Highway of Tears story is that it remains unfinished. Some perpetrators have been identified. Many have not. Some families have received answers. Many continue waiting. Some cases reached courtrooms. Most never did. The verdict, if one can call it that, remains incomplete. And yet there is something powerful about the persistence of those who refuse to stop searching. Families who continue speaking names decades later. Investigators who continue reviewing evidence. Communities that continue demanding accountability. They represent a different kind of justice. A refusal to surrender. A refusal to forget. A refusal to allow the victims to disappear twice. Because the greatest victory any predator can achieve is erasure. The Highway of Tears families have spent decades ensuring that never happens. The names remain known. The photographs remain visible. The questions remain alive. And as long as those questions survive, the search for justice continues. The courtrooms may have delivered only fragments of accountability. The legal system may have solved only portions of the mystery. but the pursuit itself endures. Relentless. Unfinished. Still moving forward along the same lonely highway where so many journeys ended. And perhaps that is the final truth about justice on the Highway of Tears. It has never been a destination. It has always been a journey. One that is still unfolding. One that is still demanding answers. One that, even after decades, refuses to end. There is a stretch of Highway 16 where the mountains seem endless. The road winds through forests that have stood for centuries. Rivers move quietly beneath bridges. Mist settles over the valleys during the early morning hours, softening the edges of the landscape until the world appears suspended between reality and memory. To a traveler passing through, it is breathtaking. To many families in northern British Columbia, it is heartbreaking, because every kilometre of that road carries echoes. Echoes of daughters who never came home. Echoes of mothers who spent years waiting for phone calls that never arrived. Echoes of communities forced to learn how to live alongside grief. The Highway of Tears is often described as a mystery. And it is. But after spending time with the stories, the investigations, the families, and the victims, it becomes clear that mystery is only part of what this story represents. At its core, the Highway of Tears is a story about absence. The absence of answers. The absence of justice. The absence of people who should still be here. When we think about unsolved crimes, there is a temptation to focus on the unknown. Who did it? How did it happen? Why? Those questions matter. Investigators dedicate careers to answering them. Families spend lifetimes hoping for them. Yet there is another question that deserves equal attention. What happens to the people left behind? Because every disappearance creates two stories. The story of the person who vanished, and the story of those who remain. For the families of Highway of Tears victims, life did not stop when the headlines faded. Birthdays continued. Holidays arrived. Children grew older. Parents grew older. The world moved forward. But grief remained. Sometimes grief is loud. Sometimes it arrives in tears and anger. Sometimes it arrives in sleepless nights. Other times it becomes quiet. A permanent companion sitting silently in the corner of every family gathering. A photograph displayed on a shelf. An empty chair at dinner. A name spoken carefully because speaking it still hurts. Many parents spent decades wondering what happened during the final moments of their daughters' lives. That uncertainty carries a unique cruelty. Death is devastating. Not knowing can be even worse. Without answers, the mind never stops searching. Every possibility remains alive. Every scenario remains imaginable. Every rumor becomes significant. Every lead becomes important. Hope and despair exist side by side. Neither fully wins. Neither fully disappears. The Highway of Tears also forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about vulnerability. The women who disappeared were not responsible for the crimes committed against them. Yet many were placed in situations where danger became harder to avoid. Limited transportation, economic hardship, geographic isolation, systemic inequalities. These were not individual failures. They were broader conditions affecting entire communities. For years, people asked why so many women hitchhiked along Highway 16. The answer was often painfully simple. Because they needed to get somewhere. School, work, family, medical appointments. Daily life does not stop because transportation is inadequate. People adapt. Sometimes those adaptations create risks. The Highway of Tears became a tragic example of what can happen when vulnerability intersects with opportunity. Predators notice opportunity. Communities pay the price. Perhaps one of the most important legacies of this story is the national conversation it helped create. For decades, many Indigenous families felt invisible. Their losses remained largely unknown outside local communities. Their concerns often struggled to gain attention. Their grief existed in relative silence. That silence eventually broke. The Highway of Tears became part of a much larger discussion about missing and murdered Indigenous women across Canada. Families who had spent years feeling unheard suddenly found audiences willing to listen. Their stories entered newspapers, documentaries, government reports, national debates. Recognition arrived late. But it arrived. And with recognition came responsibility. Because awareness alone changes nothing. Awareness must lead to action. Communities throughout northern British Columbia understood this better than anyone. Many began organizing transportation initiatives. Advocacy groups pushed for safer travel options. Families continued educating younger generations about the risks associated with the highway. Local leaders demanded reforms. People refused to accept that disappearances should simply be treated as an unavoidable part of life. That refusal matters. It matters because the Highway of Tears is not merely a story about what happened. It is also a story about what people chose to do afterward. Some chose to search. Some chose to speak. Some chose to advocate. Some chose to remember. Together, those choices transformed private grief into collective action. The families deserve enormous credit for that transformation. It would have been understandable for many to withdraw from public life, to carry their pain quietly, to stop fighting. Instead, countless relatives did the opposite. They attended meetings, spoke to reporters, worked with investigators, participated in memorial marches, shared photographs, shared memories, shared heartbreak, again and again, not because it was easy, because they believed their loved ones deserved to be remembered, and because they hoped future tragedies might be prevented. There is another lesson hidden within the Highway of Tears story. A lesson about memory. Time has a strange effect on public attention. News cycles move quickly. One tragedy replaces another. People forget. But memory can also be an act of resistance. Every photograph displayed at a memorial is an act of resistance. Every name spoken aloud is an act of resistance. Every family member refusing to let a victim be reduced to a statistic is an act of resistance. The women of the Highway of Tears were never statistics. They were individuals. Ramona Wilson, Nicole Hoare, Alberta Williams, Gloria Moody, Ayala Sarikoga, Roxanne Thiara, and many others. Each carried dreams. Each carried hopes. Each carried a future that was never fully realized. Remembering that humanity is essential. Because true crime sometimes risks focusing too heavily on perpetrators. The Highway of Tears reminds us that victims deserve the center of the story. Not the people who harmed them. The people who were taken from those who loved them. Even today, many questions remain unanswered. Some cases remain open. Some suspects were never identified. Some evidence may never be found. The possibility exists that portions of the mystery will remain unsolved forever. That reality is difficult to accept. Human beings naturally seek conclusions. We want endings. We want certainty. We want justice. The Highway of Tears offers only fragments. Partial answers. Incomplete resolutions. Lingering uncertainty. Yet perhaps there is something important about acknowledging uncertainty honestly. Not every mystery receives a perfect ending. Not every family receives closure. Not every crime is solved. Recognizing that truth does not mean surrendering hope. It means understanding the reality faced by those still waiting. And many families are still waiting. Still hoping. Still searching. Still believing that somewhere, somehow, another piece of the puzzle may emerge. A witness may come forward. Evidence may be re-examined. Technology may reveal something previously hidden. The search continues because the alternative is giving up. And giving up is something Highway of Tears families have refused to do. As we reach the end of this story, it is worth returning to the road itself. The highway remains. Vehicles continue traveling between Prince George and Prince Rupert. Tourists admire the scenery. Truck drivers move goods across the province. Families visit relatives. Life continues. Yet for those who know the history, the road feels different. Not cursed. Not haunted in a supernatural sense. Haunted by memory. Haunted by questions. Haunted by the knowledge that beneath the beauty of the landscape lies a history of loss. The forests still stand where search teams once walked. The mountains still overlook places where victims were last seen. The rivers still flow past communities forever changed by grief. Nature remembers nothing. People remember everything. And perhaps that is the final message of the Highway of Tears. Evil does not always announce itself dramatically. Sometimes it thrives in neglect. In isolation. In vulnerability. In the spaces where people stop paying attention. The families of the Highway of Tears spent decades forcing the world to pay attention. Their persistence transformed forgotten cases into a national reckoning. Their courage ensured that names would not disappear. Their determination kept the search alive. Long after investigators changed. Long after headlines faded. Long after many people moved on. The road continues stretching across northern British Columbia, disappearing into forests and mountains beyond the horizon. Somewhere along that road remain unanswered questions. But alongside those questions remains something equally powerful. Memory. The memory of women whose lives mattered. The memory of families who refused to stop searching. The memory of communities that chose to stand together against silence. And as long as those memories endure, the women of the Highway of Tears will never truly disappear. Their stories remain. Their names remain. Their voices remain. Carried forward by every person willing to remember. And perhaps, in the end, that is where justice begins. With remembrance. With truth. With the refusal to look away. Because the Highway of Tears is not only a story about loss. It is also a story about resilience. A story about love surviving grief. A story about communities refusing to surrender. And a story that continues, even now, with every family still waiting for the answers that have been hidden for far too long. More than half a century has passed since the first known disappearances connected to what would eventually become known as the Highway of Tears. Think about that for a moment. Entire generations have grown up during the lifetime of this mystery. Children who were not yet born when Gloria Moody disappeared in 1969 are now grandparents themselves. Investigators who worked the earliest cases have retired, and many have passed away. Communities have changed. Technology has evolved. The world has transformed in ways nobody could have imagined. Yet the questions remain. Who took these women? How many victims were there truly? How many predators operated along Highway 16? And how many secrets are still hidden beneath the forests, mountains, and valleys of northern British Columbia? When people discuss the Highway of Tears today, they often focus on the numbers. 18 official cases investigated under Project EPANA. Dozens of additional disappearances identified by community groups. Estimates ranging from 40 to 80 victims, or even more. Numbers help illustrate scale. But numbers can also create distance. The danger of statistics is that they sometimes make tragedy feel abstract. The Highway of Tears is not abstract. It is personal. Every case began with a human being. Someone laughing with friends. Someone making plans for the future. Someone expecting to return home. Someone loved. Someone missed. That reality remains the most important truth in the entire story. As years passed, researchers, journalists, advocates, and investigators began studying the Highway of Tears, not only as a criminal mystery, but also as a social phenomenon. The conclusions were often uncomfortable. The disappearances revealed weaknesses that extended far beyond the actions of individual offenders. Transportation gaps, geographic isolation, poverty, systemic inequality, institutional mistrust, historical discrimination. Each factor alone created challenges. Combined together, they created conditions that increased vulnerability for thousands of women living in northern communities. In many ways, the Highway of Tears forced Canada to examine itself. Not simply to ask who committed the crimes, but to ask why so many opportunities existed for those crimes to occur. Why were young women forced to hitchhike so frequently? Why did families feel ignored? Why did some disappearances receive enormous publicity, while others received relatively little attention? Why did concerns raised by communities persist for decades before receiving broader recognition? These questions transformed the conversation. The Highway of Tears was no longer only about the past. It became a warning about the future. A warning that unresolved social problems can create environments where violence flourishes. The years following the creation of Project EPANA produced mixed results. Investigators devoted enormous resources to reviewing evidence. Advances in forensic science generated new leads. DNA technology continued improving. Analytical techniques became more sophisticated. Information sharing improved. Some cases moved closer to resolution. Others remained stubbornly resistant. The reality of cold case investigations is that time works against everyone. Evidence deteriorates. Witnesses die. Memories fade. Potential suspects disappear. Every year creates new obstacles. And yet, paradoxically, time can also create opportunities. A witness who remained silent may eventually decide to speak. A family member may reveal information previously hidden. A new forensic technique may uncover evidence impossible to detect decades earlier. This tension between loss and possibility defines many cold cases. The Highway of Tears exists within that tension even today. One of the most significant developments in recent years has been the continued recognition of the broader crisis involving missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls across Canada. For many families, this acknowledgement represented something long overdue. Not because it solved individual cases, because it validated experiences that had often been dismissed. Families who spent years insisting there was a pattern were finally being heard. Communities that had raised concerns for decades were finally being taken seriously. The emotional significance of that shift cannot be overstated. Recognition matters. Being heard matters. Being believed matters. Especially when those things have been absent for so long. Yet acknowledgement alone cannot replace answers. Many families continue living with uncertainty. Some still wait for a phone call that may never come. Some still attend memorials every year. Some still keep photographs displayed prominently in their homes. The passage of time has not diminished the importance of those missing women. If anything, it has intensified the determination of those who loved them. Perhaps one of the most remarkable aspects of the Highway of Tears story is the persistence of memory. Human beings forget many things. News stories fade. Public attention shifts. Events that once dominated headlines eventually disappear from conversation. The families refused to allow that to happen. Again and again, they brought attention back to the victims. Again and again, they reminded the public that unresolved cases remained unresolved. Again and again, they insisted that every missing woman deserved dignity, respect, and answers. That persistence became one of the most powerful forces in the entire story. Not law enforcement. Not politicians. Not media organizations. Families. Families who refused to stop caring. Families who refused to stop searching. Families who refused to stop speaking. Their determination changed the national conversation. Their determination helped transform isolated tragedies into a movement demanding accountability. Their determination ensured that the women of the Highway of Tears would not be forgotten. The road itself remains unchanged in many respects. The forests are still vast. The mountains are still imposing. The distances between communities remain significant. Travelers still move along Highway 16 every day. Most reach their destinations safely. Most never experience the dangers that haunted previous generations. Yet the history remains present. Not visible in a dramatic way. Not marked by crime scene tape or flashing lights. Present in memory. Present in stories. Present in the quiet understanding shared by those who know what happened there. Some people describe the Highway of Tears as one of Canada's greatest criminal mysteries. That description is accurate. But it is also incomplete. Because mysteries focus on questions. The Highway of Tears is equally about consequences. The consequences of violence. The consequences of neglect. The consequences of silence. And the consequences of refusing to listen when vulnerable communities ask for help. Future investigators may solve additional cases. Future technology may reveal evidence currently hidden. Future witnesses may come forward. Some answers may still be waiting. History has repeatedly demonstrated that even decades-old mysteries can eventually yield their secrets. No one can predict what discoveries lie ahead. No one can know whether every question will ever be answered. But hope remains. Hope remains because families continue searching. Hope remains because investigators continue working. Hope remains because the victims continue being remembered. And memory has power. The power to inspire action. The power to demand accountability. The power to ensure that those who disappeared are never reduced to mere statistics. As this story reaches its conclusion, one image remains particularly striking. A long highway stretching toward the horizon. Forest on either side. Mountains in the distance. A road connecting communities across northern British Columbia. For most people, it is simply a route. For others, it is a symbol. A symbol of loss. A symbol of resilience. A symbol of unanswered questions. And perhaps most importantly, a symbol of the ongoing responsibility to protect those who are vulnerable. Because the ultimate lesson of the Highway of Tears is not about fear. It is about attention. Pay attention to the missing. Pay attention to the forgotten. Pay attention when families ask for help. Pay attention when communities raise alarms. Pay attention before tragedy becomes history. The women of the Highway of Tears deserved futures that were taken from them. They deserved safety. They deserved justice. They deserved to return home. Many never did. But their stories endure. Their names endure. Their memories endure. And as long as those memories survive, the search for truth survives with them. Somewhere beyond the forests and mountains, beyond the aging case files and fading witness statements, beyond decades of uncertainty, the answers still exist. Perhaps hidden. Perhaps incomplete. Perhaps waiting. And until every possible lead has been explored, every possible question examined, and every possible truth pursued, the Highway of Tears will remain what it has always been. Not simply a road, not simply a mystery, but a promise. A promise that the women who disappeared will be remembered. A promise that their families will not stand alone. And a promise that the search for justice, however long it takes, will continue. If there is one question that continues to haunt the Highway of Tears more than any other, it is this. Could some of these tragedies have been prevented? It is a difficult question. An uncomfortable question. A question that has followed families, investigators, journalists, and government officials for decades. Because once the disappearances began accumulating, once the names started forming a list, once the pattern became impossible to ignore, people naturally began looking backward. They examined every decision, every missed opportunity, every warning sign, every moment when history might have taken a different path. Hindsight is powerful. Looking backward, patterns appear obvious. Connections seem clear. Solutions appear simple. Reality is rarely that straightforward. Yet the Highway of Tears presents too many painful coincidences to ignore. Too many families reported similar concerns. Too many women faced similar risks. Too many disappearances unfolded under similar circumstances. And for many communities across northern British Columbia, those similarities raised questions that remain unresolved even today. Long before national media discovered the story, local families were already worried. They understood the dangers of the region. They understood the distances involved. They understood how easily a person could vanish between communities. Most importantly, they understood how frequently women relied on hitchhiking. To outsiders, hitchhiking often appears to be a choice. For many residents of northern British Columbia, it was frequently a necessity. Imagine living in a remote community where public transportation is limited or non-existent. Imagine needing to attend school, visit family, travel to work, or reach medical appointments. Imagine having no personal vehicle. What options remain? For many years, hitchhiking became part of everyday life. Not because people ignored risks, because they lacked alternatives. Parents worried. Communities worried. Young women worried. Yet daily life continued. Life requires movement. Responsibilities require travel. The road remained essential. That reality created a vulnerability that predators could exploit. Every community knew it. The question was whether enough had been done to address it. As the number of disappearances increased, pressure mounted. Families demanded greater attention. Community leaders raised concerns. Advocacy groups called for action. Some recommendations focused on transportation, safer travel options, expanded bus services, improved access between communities, practical solutions designed to reduce the need for hitchhiking. Others focused on investigations, better coordination, faster responses, improved communication with families, more resources dedicated to missing person cases. The challenge was that meaningful change often moved slowly. Meanwhile, the disappearances continued. For the families involved, every delay felt personal. Every unsolved case reinforced fears that another tragedy could occur. And sometimes it did. One of the most significant developments emerged from years of advocacy by Indigenous communities. Families repeatedly argued that the disappearances could not be understood solely as criminal acts. The problem was larger. The victims shared common experiences shaped by geography, poverty, discrimination, and social marginalization. Ignoring those realities, they argued, meant ignoring part of the truth. Over time, these concerns gained increasing recognition. Researchers began examining broader patterns. Government inquiries gathered testimony. Community members shared experiences that had rarely received national attention. The result was a deeper understanding of the factors contributing to vulnerability. Yet understanding and solving are not the same thing. Recognition alone could not bring victims home. Recognition alone could not identify offenders. Recognition alone could not erase decades of grief. Still, it represented progress. Because before problems can be addressed, they must first be acknowledged. The Highway of Tears also revealed important lessons about missing person investigations. Historically, many law enforcement agencies approached disappearances differently, depending on circumstances. Adults were often presumed capable of leaving voluntarily. Initial assumptions sometimes focused on runaways, misunderstandings, or temporary absences. In many situations, those assumptions were reasonable. Most missing person reports do not involve homicide. But the Highway of Tears demonstrated the danger of applying ordinary assumptions to extraordinary circumstances. When vulnerable women repeatedly disappear along the same corridor, ordinary explanations become less convincing. Families recognized this long before official institutions did. Many relatives describe spending years fighting simply to be heard, convincing others that something serious had happened, convincing authorities that immediate action mattered, convincing the public that their daughters deserved attention. Those experiences left lasting scars. Trust, once damaged, is difficult to rebuild. Even today, some families remain skeptical of institutions that they believe failed them during critical moments. Perhaps one of the most valuable lessons from the Highway of Tears involves listening. Listening to communities. Listening to families. Listening to those closest to a problem. People living along Highway 16 often understood dangers that outsiders failed to appreciate. They knew which stretches of road felt unsafe. They knew how transportation challenges affected daily life. They knew which warnings had gone ignored. Their experiences contained important information. Information that might have helped shape earlier responses. Information that may still help prevent future tragedies. The story also highlights the importance of visibility. Many victims disappeared before widespread social media existed. Before online campaigns could spread information instantly. Before digital communities could mobilize search efforts within hours. Today, missing person cases often gain attention rapidly. Photographs circulate across platforms. Information reaches thousands of people immediately. The Highway of Tears emerged during a different era. Many families had to rely on posters, newspaper articles, and word of mouth. The limitations of that environment created additional challenges. Awareness spread more slowly. Information traveled less efficiently. Opportunities were lost. Modern technology cannot solve every crime, but it has transformed how communities respond to disappearances. That transformation represents one of the lasting changes influenced by stories like the Highway of Tears. There is also a lesson about memory. Societies often struggle to maintain attention on long-term problems. A single dramatic event captures headlines. A crisis lasting decades becomes easier to overlook. The Highway of Tears resisted that pattern because families refused to allow forgetting. Year after year, they organized memorials. Year after year, they shared stories. Year after year, they reminded the public that unresolved cases remained unresolved. Their persistence ensured that the conversation continued. Without that persistence, many of these women might have faded from public awareness entirely. Instead, their stories helped reshape national discussions about violence, accountability, and public safety. As investigators continue examining evidence and reviewing old cases, the possibility remains that additional answers may emerge. History offers numerous examples of cold cases solved decades after crimes occurred. A forgotten witness comes forward. A DNA profile produces a match. New technology reveals hidden evidence. What once seemed impossible suddenly becomes achievable. The families of Highway of Tears victims understand this reality better than anyone. Hope can survive for extraordinary lengths of time. Not because hope is easy, because abandoning it feels impossible. Every unanswered question leaves room for possibility. Every unsolved case leaves room for discovery. Every missing piece leaves room for truth. And truth matters. Even decades later. Perhaps especially decades later. Because the passage of time never reduces the value of a human life. A victim lost 50 years ago matters, just as much as a victim lost yesterday. Their families still deserve answers. Their communities still deserve answers. History itself deserves answers. The Highway of Tears remains one of Canada's most enduring mysteries. But it is also one of Canada's most important lessons. A lesson about vulnerability. A lesson about attention. A lesson about listening. A lesson about the consequences of allowing warning signs to accumulate without adequate response. Most importantly, it is a lesson about humanity. Behind every investigation stands a family. Behind every statistic stands a person. Behind every missing poster stands a life interrupted. The women of the Highway of Tears were daughters, sisters, mothers, friends, classmates, co-workers, and neighbors. Their stories extend far beyond the circumstances of their disappearances. And perhaps that is what should be remembered most. Not merely how they vanished, but how they lived. Because every victim deserved more than becoming part of a mystery. They deserved long futures. They deserved opportunities. They deserved safety. They deserved to reach their destinations. The fact that so many never did remains one of the deepest tragedies in modern Canadian history.